Hey, everyone. Wow. All right, we are starting early today. Eric had asked if we could start the show an hour earlier today because of some other things he had scheduled this afternoon. So we're starting at 11 instead of noon. And at the moment, we're just waiting for Eric to join us. Now, what we're going to do today, oh, by the way, I always try to say this up front, and I always forget, so I'm going to say it up front right now. If you are watching this after the fact, we're going to put chapter markers down here in YouTube. You know, just hover over the video. You'll see that there's chapter markers there. Click on them, and you can jump right to the part of the show that you want to get to. Like if you want to jump straight to when we start recording the show, for example. And if you like all this pre-show banter, cool. You can watch all that too. I told Eric up front that one of the issues I was going to have today is I'm always pushing my notes right up until we're about to start recording. And recording an hour earlier, I cautioned I might not quite be ready with my notes yet. And that's true. That's true. I'm not quite ready. In fact, I just realized before the countdown hit 0 that I completely forgot a big chunk of what I do to get ready, and that is the show title and the episode number and the intro and all that kind of stuff. Completely forgot to get that ready. So I was getting that ready as the countdown finished up there, and I may continue to do that while we're waiting for Eric to join us. But yeah, what we're going to do this time, did I even talk about that? I think I started to talk about that. What we're going to do this time is set aside the coding discussion and jump onto a topic that's actually came about because of a conversation I had with someone on the phone last week. And I'll tell the story when we start recording. As I said to Eric, it's typical Mike, how this all came about. But yeah, we're gonna kind of tackle a more traditional type topic, and that is choosing the right Mac for someone who's new to the platform, or maybe someone who hasn't purchased a new Mac in quite some time. And it kind of came about because of this conversation I had. No, it absolutely came about because of this conversation I had. And I hope, at least she indicated she might, I hope that the person I spoke with is now a For Mac Guys Only listener. That would be cool. That would be cool. And let's see, we've got Eric joining us, so I'm going to get him. Let's see if I can get him into. Can you hear me, Eric?
I can hear you.
Oh, look at that. Look
switched over to my headphones. Good. Yep, all's good.
Look at that smiling face.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yes. Good morning. How are you?
Well, I was just filling people in on the topic change. Well, not topic change. I said, we're setting aside coding, but we're going to do that. When we set out to talk about coding, we deliberately said we're going to do it like every other episode or every third episode, and not kind of overwhelm people with this topic of coding, because if you don't have an interest in it, it can get awful technical and
yeah. No, that is the truth. I mean, it can be a little bit much if it's not your cup of tea, or you don't ever think you'll do something like that or whatever. So yeah,
and we know. We know when we come up with these topics, we're so varied in our topics. We know that not every episode is everyone's cup of tea, but we're going to try to spread out those cups of Earl Grey, or coding Grey? No, Earl Grey coding discussions over the course of, several weeks instead of cramming them all together.
Exactly. And actually, Earl Grey is not my cup of tea. I wanted to like it a lot, but I just doesn't too strong of a taste or something.
Well, let's tackle that topic, Eric, because I was not even a coffee drinker until maybe 14 years ago, something like that. Somewhere in there. I never was a coffee drinker, and then we had a chain. It's actually a Minneapolis chain, but we had one in Chicago near us, Caribou Coffee.
Okay, yeah, I think I've heard of them.
And I guess I had tried Starbucks here and there, from time to time, and quite frankly, I'm not a big fan of their coffee. It tastes funny to me. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just not a big Starbucks fan. I'll drink it if I have to.
You were not the only one to say that, actually.
Yeah.
Just regular coffee, yeah.
I tend to always get dark roast, and so I like a nice, rich kind of, nice, rich coffee with just the right amount of acidity to it. That's what I really like. And I ended up trying, I think we were up in Minneapolis at Mall of America, and and Caribou is based out of Minneapolis, so I ended up trying a dark roast there and really liked it. I thought it was great. So I started getting it. I think someone got me a gift card or something, and I started getting it from the Caribou down the street from the company I worked for. And I didn't get it every day. I just got it every few days or maybe every couple weeks, something like that. But started to drink coffee, and up to the point where I'm now drinking it every every day,
Every day. Yeah.
more than I should, no doubt. But I also didn't drink tea, and what is maybe it's really only been recent, like maybe in the last 2 years or so, I started drinking tea. If that long,
Oh,
it might even be sooner than that. But I really like green teas. There's a lot of different green
yeah.
teas,
They're good for you too.
and
Green tea
and
has got, yeah.
they're good for you too.
It's
And yeah, we picked up a tea. So for those who aren't familiar, Epcot, yeah, Disney World, Epcot has a section of the park called the World Showcase, and it's kind of like a World's Fair. That was the original intention. It was supposed to be like a World's Fair, different countries, stores that represent goods from those countries. The cast members who work there are often cast members, students who come in to work within those countries. And they'll put on their name badge, what country or what city they're from in that country, which is cool. Which is what regular cast members do too.
yeah.
But in England, the UK pavilion, if you will, they have a Twinings tea store, and they have a special that they run. If you buy so many boxes, you get a discount on them. Plus, we we usually get annual pass holder discounts, or we get other discounts on them on top of that. So it's really a pretty decent deal. Even though the teas are priced a little higher than they are elsewhere, it's a decent deal, and it's a good opportunity to sample new types of teas.
Yeah.
And I
It
picked
sounds
up
really good.
I picked up they have a new line of teas, and I picked one up that I really like. It's called Energize, and it's a green tea with lime and cranberry.
Mm. Oh, that sounds interesting. That sounds
Yeah,
really good, actually.
yeah, and I really like that. And I don't drink many black teas,
Yeah.
So to your point,
No.
Earl Grey, I don't drink many black teas, but the green teas I really enjoy.
Yeah. My love affair for coffee and tea both run for a long time. And actually, it's so funny because you mentioned, because Tracy, my wife, didn't really drink a lot of coffee. She never drank coffee, and I couldn't get it, near her. And I was like, just put stuff in it, and so finally she did that. And now, like you, she drinks it every day.
Yeah.
And my daughter goes to Starbucks like every other day. I mean, and she like her mom has a whole bunch of stuff in the coffee, and she goes there more for their other drink. I don't even know what she's she's like, I get the caramel macchiato, brown sugar, vanilla, whatever.
I
I
don't know
don't
what
know what
that
it is,
means.
but
I,
yeah,
I have no
I don't
idea what
either.
that means.
Yep. But she loves it, and she's gotten other people to really like it. So that's her place. But you are exactly right about their coffee. Although I am drinking that right now, I am drinking out of my
Ooh,
awesome Max Stock
look at
mug.
that
I
fancy
am
mug you've
drinking
got.
Starbucks coffee. It's very fancy. It's really nice. I am drinking Starbucks today because it's their blonde roast with twice the caffeine. So I took a chance and I thought, you know what, I'll do that. So
Wait a minute, a light roast with twice the caffeine?
yeah, actually, well, and I'm sure this is not why. I'm sure it's probably because they actually just put more caffeine in there. But the less the roast, the more the caffeine. The darker the roast, the more caffeine gets roasted out of it. People tend to. It's the opposite of what people think. And I
I guess it
learned
is.
that
Yeah.
off of. Do you remember that show Good Eats?
Oh yeah.
It's
Oh yeah.
with
Alton Brown.
Alton C. Brown. Yeah, he. I learned that on that show. Actually,
Really?
it was really good, and I've seen it several times since. So I tend to go after the light roast or the blonde roast or whatever they call it.
Now, do you put stuff in your coffee?
No, generally no. I just
Yeah, I
and
don't either.
and I have, but part of it is like I don't want the extra calories. The other part of it is it kind of slows me down from drinking. I tend to just like drink everything super fast, you
Mm.
know, and then I have to run to the bathroom, and it's I don't know, it's just a thing.
That
And I
that's a
mean,
problem with coffee. Yeah.
yeah, it's so I just keep it black and enjoy it and sip it and drink it over time rather than put a bunch of cream and sugar in there and drink it down in 10 minutes. So
Yeah. 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 I think if you're going to put stuff in it, if you're going to put cream and sugar or anything in it, it really doesn't matter where you get it.
yeah,
But
right,
if you're
right,
not going to put anything in it, you know, quite frankly, I like McDonald's coffee over Starbucks.
yeah.
Sorry.
Again, you're not the only one.
I
It's
Dunkin' Donuts dark roasts are good. I like those.
Dunkin' Donuts is really good. Yeah, Dunkin' Donuts. Yeah,
I don't tend to buy. We brew it at home, so I
yeah,
don't. And
yep.
and then I put it in my. So my mug is not a Macstock mug. Mine is a
Oh, that's a nice
Hollywood
one though.
Studios mug,
Oh, that's excellent.
and it's yeah. I really enjoy it. I
Yeah,
like that one a lot.
that's a yeah.
So
Well, I mean, I hate to say that I've got you beat with this mug,
oh,
but
you
still,
do.
yours is nice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, your coffee's going to stay warm. I'll tell you that tumbler, that
yeah.
Macstock tumbler. When I bought that, there was another
This is
one.
good.
I don't think I have it at hand here, but there's another one that I got first. That's a black a tumbler with a cork bottom, and
Yeah.
that
Yep.
kept your drink warm quite some time.
Yeah.
Then I got that new one that you were just holding up, and you put coffee in there, it might as well be a thermos. It stays warm
Yeah.
all day long. It's
Yeah.
really a great, great tumbler.
It is really, really good. It is excellent. It's perfect for coffee too. It's just,
Yeah.
in fact, actually, I don't even a lot of times put the lid on it unless I'm going someplace and I want to keep just
Yeah.
because it stays so hot that I don't want to burn my tongue every time I take a drink. So I'll like just like now I've got the lid off. But if I'm
Yeah.
going someplace and I get it in the car, then I'll put it on. But oh, I was going to mention, yeah, coffee shops. There's a place called Pete's Coffee
Oh, yeah.
out
Yeah.
here, and they're actually pretty good. Their coffee. I I found that I've not really found anything there that I don't like. As far as their plain coffee. I mean, it's actually really good.
And, not to extend this non-Apple
Yeah,
conversation that much longer, although it
yeah,
is, it's a topic that's very, very near and dear to many people's hearts, especially
yeah,
in tech. There's a lot of folks who just
yeah.
drink tea or don't drink anything at all, or
Right,
drink Coke Zero. Hello, Barry.
right. Yeah, I love
But
Coke Zero too.
store brand coffees, if you buy the ground store brand coffees,
Yep, yep.
we've found that the store brand, Aldi brand coffees are really good.
Really,
We
I'll have to
we
try
tend to
that.
get the Sumatra, or we tend to get the what's the other one we get? Colombia is the lighter roast. What do we get? We get Sumatra and we get French roast, I think, from there. And the thing is, Starbucks and even Dunkin' Donuts is a little pricier too,
Hmm.
store bought coffee, but the
Yep.
Starbucks coffee has gotten more expensive, and they're putting a little less in the bag now.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Yep.
the Aldi coffee is really a great price. It's like five something for a bag,
Oh my gosh.
and it's
Yeah,
good.
that's wow.
I think it's at least as good as the Starbucks, or we purchase Dunkin' Donuts. I like some of the Dunkin' Donuts coffees, and then
I
I'll get
love
some of the
Dunkin'
Starbucks
Donuts.
like odd flavors, like they'll have a spring flavor or something like that, and I'll get
Right.
those sometimes.
Get
But
those. Yeah. No, I love Dunkin' Donuts. Just even their regular medium roast coffee is just excellent. And I was going to say too, one more thing on that. You mentioned Colombia, and I noticed this, and I didn't ever really pay attention to this before, but it's the where it's roasted or where it comes from
Hmm.
on Earth actually seems to have a big difference. Because for a while I would be like, Arabica beans, the normal coffee, yeah, it's great, but Colombia to me always was better. It had more of a nuttier taste, and and now my sister and her family and my mom had went to Hawaii a few years back, and they
Kona.
got Kona, and
Yeah,
that is really good. And it's expensive, and it's really hard to find. Just you can't like just get a bag of pure Kona coffee. You can get blends and stuff like that, but
sure.
it's not the same. It's that is really good.
I I want to say I've had it, but I can't say with 100% authority that I have. I feel like I
Yeah,
have, but I can't remember when that might have been. But yeah, I've heard that time and time again. One coffee I'll admit I've never tried is the civet coffee. You know what I'm talking about?
no,
Often
yeah,
referred to as the cat poop coffee
right.
because they'll feed the civets the beans and uh, their intestinal tract will get rid of the outer coating of it and leave just the what we call the bean,
Bean,
and
yeah.
they'll filter it out of the poop. Yeah,
I've I've heard too that that's really good.
I've heard it's
But
good. I'm not
yeah,
eager
I
to try
haven't.
it. It might be
No,
good. I don't know.
I gotta think there's another way someone could do that without having to feed it to
They
civets.
say not. They say not.
I, s- I suppose not.
I will take them at their word.
Yeah, I will take them at their word too. And yeah, that's probably one thing I don't need. Plus, that's really expensive.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's well for obvious reasons. So, yeah,
Yeah, and not to give any impression that I'm going out and getting coffee all the time. I don't. I very
yeah,
rarely go out and actually get a cup of coffee from a Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or
yeah.
or even
Nope,
McDonald's. But
same here.
I do from time to time, every few weeks or something, I might get a cup of coffee or what have you. To the point where I've had $5 on my Starbucks gift card for like 2 years now.
Oh, wow.
I just haven't used it, and I
Yeah,
had something like $9 on my Dunkin' Donuts gift card, and it was three. Now this was weird. It was like 3 weeks ago or so. We decided to get some donuts, and a little special occasion was going on here, and we decided to get some Dunkin' Donuts, and they had a special going on too. So it was some insane price, like $2 for a half dozen donuts or something like that. So we pre-ordered. I always pre-order these days. I don't know if you do the same thing, but you fire up the app, you pre-order, you go in,
yeah,
they hand you
yeah,
the order, and you're out. There's no waiting in line. I do that at
yeah.
McDonald's all the time. I do it at Dunkin' Donuts. I don't wait
I
in
do it.
lines. Even Starbucks, you pre-order, you go
Yeah,
to the end of the line, you get your drink, you're out. You don't have to sit there and wait for anything. I don't know why more people don't do it.
but you know what? In a way, you're kind of glad that they don't
I
because
know
you don't want
because
everybody.
that would just change where the line is.
The line is, yep, exactly. In fact, actually, I don't know which place it was that did kind of happen. I never used to wait in lines. I used to pre-order it, and now all of a sudden I can't. It's like the line is moved over there. So, but it's still less than the normal. But yeah, exactly. It's
Well, I'll have to chapter marker this section coffee talk.
yes,
Remember that
yes,
Saturday? Yeah,
exactly.
coffee talk.
Coffee talk.
Anyway, to finish that thought, so weirdness with Dunkin' Donuts was I don't know, I had something like $7 on my gift card, and we went to make the purchase. I think we each got a drink, and then we got the special on the donuts, and there wasn't quite enough on the gift card to buy it, but they wouldn't let me partially pay. I couldn't partially pay with what was left on the gift card and pay the balance with Apple Pay.
How are you
I
supposed to
had
use
to
that?
buy more for the gift card. I had to put another $10 on the gift card, and then I could finish the purchase using the money I had on the gift card. It's very bizarre.
Because was that was pre-order.
That was pre-order. Yeah.
Okay.
So I
I'm
don't know.
like, you would hope that that would happen in person because why would that? I don't know. That seems like it's a really, I don't know,
Yeah.
kind of.
And I will say, Eric, we are honored to be joined in the chat room by Dave Ginsburg from In Touch with iOS.
Oh,
He's in the chat room right now. And he said that his wife has a gold Starbucks card. You know what? I do too. I do too. They used to put the little things on the packages of coffee, and we used to buy the Starbucks coffee actually at Walmart all the time. It was like $6.50 for a bag of coffee. So we'd buy that, we'd get the points. Well, they figured out that people were stealing the little tags and not buying the
ah,
coffee and getting their stars, and so they canceled that program. And you had to start sending them your entire receipt just to get your points. I'm like, forget. I'm not going to send
come
my
on.
my entire receipt to Starbucks so that
See,
they can
yeah,
data mine me and see what I'm buying and
right,
whatever.
right.
So I just stopped. I stopped doing it, and but that practice of gathering the little tags and saving the stars and all that got me a gold card too, Dave. And yeah, I don't know where it is. I have one. It's somewhere. But
Can you
like I said,
still
I've got
use it?
$5 on my card, and I haven't used it.
Haven't used it. Can you still use your gold card though, or I mean, is it?
It's basically it's a gift card basically.
Yeah,
Oh, am I
yeah,
still gold status? No, I'm not
yeah.
still a gold status member anymore. I suppose I could,
Okay.
I suppose I could flash it and say I'm a gold card, but I don't because I buy through the app. I never really physically
Right.
use the card, so that's tied to
Yeah.
your account.
Right.
And because I use the app to pre-order, that of course they see I'm not anymore, and never will be
Yeah.
again, I'm sure.
Never will be. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But still, you've got it.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Exactly. So I started things out. Here we are, 25 minutes in. I started things out telling people that we were recording an hour early today because you had some stuff that you had to take care of this afternoon. So we should probably go ahead and do that so that you can get on with your
Yes.
day as
Actually, get
well.
going. Yes. Right. With all
I
my
don't
fun
have
stuff. Yeah.
anything other than the topic we talked about ready to go. So, but I think that's gonna fill up our conversation anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Considering we just filled 25 minutes with talking about
Coffee
coffee.
talk. Coffee
Yeah. And
talk.
coffee talk. And we could
Coffee
do it
talk. There you go.
another 25 minutes probably. So yeah, I think you're
Yeah, if
right.
we don't get started, it will be another 25 minutes. And
Right.
I mean, look, I think we already lost Dave. He was watching. He did leave it, and he already tuned out. He's like, I'm done. I'm not watching
Done.
any more of this.
That's a, well, you know what?
Oh,
Win some, you lose some.
you win
Yes.
some, you lose some. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think he tuned out. He's like, yeah, I'm
I
done
don't.
with this.
I don't
I'm done
blame
with this.
him. Yeah.
Dave's all business, man. He's all
Yeah.
business.
Yep.
Actually, he recorded his show last night. He had on, let's see, who did he have on? He had on Chuck. I can't remember who he had on. Dave, Chuck. I know Chuck was on because they were going to talk about NAB because Chuck had just gotten back from NAB. So I know that they were going to talk
Oh
about
yeah, it's
that.
April, isn't it? Yep.
Yeah, yeah, that's in April. Anyway,
Yeah.
I had it on in the
How that was.
background. And Kelly, yeah, he had Kelly Gamont, he had Chuck Joyner, Dave. Who was his fourth? I had it on in the background, so I can't picture it. Uh, all right. It does matter, but we need to get on with our recording.
Right. Right. Right.
Okay, so here we go. We are at 28 minutes in. I just got to get something started here on this end. Pull my notes up. Oh, I know. It was Jeff. Jeff, of course, it was Jeff Gamet. Just occurred to me. It was Jeff Gamet. Of course, it was Jeff Gamet.
Oh,
Jeff's on
yeah.
all the time. Duh,
He's on
Mike. Yeah. Like I said, I had it on kind of in the background. I wasn't watching it, and I was trying to remember whose voices I heard. Yeah, Chuck, Kelly, Jeff, and Dave. That's who it was. All right, now my brain can focus on the show.
From
Here we go.
Jeff Gamet from the Mac Observer, right?
No,
Okay.
no.
Was
Actually,
he ever?
formerly of the Mac Observer.
Okay. Yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, Dave just said, he just confirmed Jeff in the chat room. I'm sorry, Jeff. Like I said, I had it on in the background. I was listening to it, and I was trying to match the voices I heard with faces and... Oh, yeah. Good show, though. Good show.
Yeah. Yeah. I also
So
checked
he
it
was-
out. I've got a subscription to it. So
He typically records live on Thursdays, so that's when you'd want to tune in. And then Jeff, of course, is, let's see, I think it's the Mac Show on Fridays. He hosts that. I think it's the Mac Show on Friday.
oh, okay.
And
okay.
that's live. Like, I thought Dave was on there. What are you doing in the chat room, Dave? I thought you were live on the Mac Show right now.
Maybe he's bored with that, and now he just bounces back and forth.
He's bouncing back
It's
and
like
forth.
whatever
Yeah, it
holds
could
his
be.
interest. Yeah.
Although I think he's actually a guest on the show, so I don't know. Well, maybe he can. Maybe he can.
Maybe Jeff's like Dave. Dave.
Dave?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Dave? Would you like to play a game, Dave?
Would you like to play a game? Yeah. Dave.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear.
Professor Falcon, right? Professor Falcon.
Is that what it was? I don't remember.
War games. Yeah.
Oh, War Games. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Would
no,
you
I
like
was
to
thinking
play
of
a game?
2001.
Right. Hal.
Hal.
Hal might have said that too.
I think so.
What are you doing, Dave? Yeah. That. Do you know there's a whole history on that too? With that was a Kubrick thing. He didn't do anything explicit, super explicit, but it was kind of the visuals. And Hal wasn't supposed to be this homicidal AI. It was kind of like Kubrick was trying to push space as a cold, dead place. Why do we even bother? And the future isn't that. It's more of a cynical view. But IBM and I think some other companies put a bunch of money into it. And when they had saw that with Hal, they got all ticked off and they said, pull our name off it. We don't want to have anything to do with it. And it was really interesting, actually.
Well, you know how everything comes around. You know, we were finally living our Star Trek life. We
Yeah.
had our tablets. We had our iPads.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have our communicators. I have a communicator
Yep.
right here.
Right there. Yep.
We have all kinds of amazing technology at our fingertips that seemingly originated in the world of Star Trek.
Star Trek. I know.
And now, thank you, Eric, for bringing up homicidal AIs, because I think we're probably this close to
I know.
homicidal AIs.
I know.
Every time I try Chat GPT and it comes back with this answer in 3 seconds, which
Yes.
would normally take us, a couple hours of thinking and writing and,
Right.
considering all the options, and it takes 3 seconds to come up. I'm like, we're this close
Yeah.
to, would you like to play a game? Let me open the
Yeah.
pod bay door.
Hell, I know. Let me release all of the oxygen on Earth into space.
Do you mind if I eject you into space?
Yeah, you know what? You're not kidding. In fact, actually, I had it write a poem about Bitcoin from the point of Mr. Spock, Worf,
God.
and somebody else, and it did an amazing job.
It does.
You know,
it does.
It
It's
just
crazy.
like you said, within
Crazy
3
stupid.
seconds.
It's a great
And-
tool, but it's easily abused. It's
scary.
all right. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that at the beginning of the show. No, we'll talk about it now. So it's a great tool. It's a great thing
Yeah.
to have at your disposal when you're stuck for what to say next, or maybe Maybe
Right.
you've written something. I've used it for this. You've written something. You're pretty happy with it, but you say, I would like to make this a little bit lighter, or I'd like to make it a little more serious, or I'd like to add a couple more points I haven't considered, or things like that. And it's amazing how vague you can be. You have to be somewhat precise, but how vague you can be in your request
Oh
and get
yeah.
something back that is actually useful.
Right.
And I don't think anyone should really take what ChatGPT or any of the other AIs return and use it verbatim, but
Hmm.
as a tool to help you work through a problem,
Yeah.
it's actually pretty useful.
Oh my gosh.
But it's not hard to see how it could be abused.
Oh, oh, without a doubt. I mean, it's just yeah. I mean, the possibilities are endless on both ends of it, on just what it can do positively and negatively. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of, in fact, like you said, I too believe that I think we're this close to that. And somebody was talking to some interviewer was talking to Elon Musk, and he said, what he said, and Elon, and they were talking about like maybe the government or something should have a way of shutting things down if things got too much. And he said, in the case of OpenAI or DeepMind, he said all its servers are really going to be in one place for each of those. They're not going to be spread out everywhere. So that makes it easier. And he said, well, what would you consider the line? What would be crossing the line that you would say, let's shut this down? He goes, well, if I couldn't log in, if in other words, we lost control of it and because it changed the password, it didn't allow us to actually. He goes, I would think that would be a pretty good cue. We need to shut this down. And I'm
Yeah,
like, yeah, that would be.
it would be. Not that I
Yeah,
take much of what Elon Musk says
yeah. Well, you know what?
without a hefty
Despite,
block of salt, but
yeah,
yeah,
he's he's a he is a loon, but he's also a genius. I mean, I think they kind of go hand in hand. I mean, I
often do.
I, I don't get into the politics with that and everything, but it's like you can't, you know, we we have electric cars now. That I mean, we had them anyway, but at least you know, for what it's worth, it's kind of amazing how he's kind of like the Steve Jobs, probably in his early years, you know, without maybe the other good things about Steve Jobs. I don't
Intelligence.
know how to say it. Yeah. Well, I think
Genius and
he's intelligent.
intelligence are two different things.
Yeah. Right.
Mad genius and
Right.
intelligence. Now, to be fair, we did
Yeah.
have electric cars before
We
internal
did.
combustion engines.
Right. But it's like for me, people would say, well, electric car. And I'm like, I don't want to go 40 miles with a 50 mile per hour max speed. I want to do what I'm doing now, And I mean, it'll, hate or, whatever you think of combustion engines, they work, I mean, you want to drive 300 miles in a blizzard, you can do it, And so I understand too, it's a convergence of technology, but I mean, Tesla seemed like it wasn't just the first good electric car. It was a good car, It's actually, and I mean, obviously, other people are going forward with more things, but I mean, it's I don't know.
Quick,
I don't.
yeah,
Yeah.
quick charging, and more charging stations are required in a country like the United States, where
Yes.
longer distance travel is the norm.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
We go 24 miles a day round trip to and from our shop and my office.
Yeah. Yep.
On some cars, that's the entire life of the battery.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. And
So,
it's definitely, you're exactly right. I watch a lot of YouTube videos from people who live abroad and then they come here and then their ideas of what America or what they feel, and almost without a fault, or I would say probably 80% of the time, people say everything's like
so far apart.
long distant. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like I have to drive this, it's not all, close together. And so, yeah, that's a big deal. I mean, like you said, when you're doing 24, and when I used to live there, I was doing 50 miles round trip a day, driving to and from work and stuff. And yeah, that's, it's never going to, well, not that it can't work, but I mean, obviously we still have a ways to go.
And we don't have any longer. We used to, but we don't any longer have good long distance rail travel between
No,
major destinations.
right.
There's no great way to get from Chicago to Disney World by rail. There just isn't. You can fly, but you can't
Right.
get there by
They
rail.
can drive. Yeah.
You can drive, and
Yeah.
that's about it.
And
And
that's sad.
there's a lot of that. And so I think if we can get some more high speed rail, we can bring it back. It's gonna really take a major overhaul of our rail infrastructure to do that,
Yes. Yeah.
which is why it's
Huge.
going so slowly. But if we can get more of it, I would use it. I would use it for
Yeah.
sure.
I
The
would too.
Amtrak trip I took to Seattle was fantastic. I loved it.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. You did. And I've heard people, they've come out here, went from Wisconsin to California. But the problem with that was they ended up getting stuck someplace. They had to reroute because of fires. And then they ended up getting stuck somewhere in like New Mexico because of the freight trains actually have priority.
They
So
have right
they had
away.
to
Yep.
wait right away. And so, and that's where they make their dollars. But anyway, I was going to say they're working on a high speed rail from Los Angeles to Vegas. Now, I wish they would go other places too, but it'll be interesting
That
to
would be good.
see how that turns out. Yeah, I would ride that. And I often thought, why couldn't they build some high speed rail that, went from just across the country, LA to New York, but it stopped in Denver, stops in Chicago, and then, that's it. It's maybe a total of, it's a total of four stops with two in between and something that goes 400 miles an hour or whatever. And so that you can get from one side of the country to the other within a few hours and not have to fly,
Yeah.
because I can tell you flying is just, ugh,
Th-
can't.
There are a lot of great choices to get to the West Coast from Chicago. Chicago benefits from being, and has been for a very, very long time, a major rail hub. So
Right, right.
there's a lot of great ways to get from Chicago to the West Coast. There's like one way to get to the East Coast. I think you can do. I may be wrong in that, but I think you can do Chicago to Washington, D.C., and I think that's about it. And then you have to hop on other lines. But there's two or three great ways to get by rail to the West Coast, whether it be San Francisco, Seattle/Portland, and or Los Angeles. And the one I took was the line that went up to Seattle. And there is one point. It was kind of interesting. So everybody who goes from Chicago to Portland and or Seattle is on the same train. And then there's one point where they actually split the train, and half of it goes to Portland and half of it goes to Seattle, which is kind of cool.
That's
And so that's
weird.
how they handle that. And then as you are coming back east again, they reverse that process. So they meet up in, I can't remember where it is they meet up, but they meet up again, join up, and go on to Chicago. So
How do
kind of
they do
interesting.
that? Do they just back you up and then, or
They
do
just did
they?
they. So if you're going to be going to Portland, they put you on these cars, these
I
cars of the
guess.
train, and if you're going to Seattle, you go on these cars of the train, and they split the train at that point, and part of it goes there and part of it goes there, and I think they
So
they
they don't.
disconnect and then they hook an engine up to the
That's what I was going to say. They
yeah
don't have like two engines, and yeah, they don't like have an
yeah I
engine in
can't
the middle of things, and then
yeah I can't remember how many
notice.
engines they had on that train. I think they had two engines on the train.
Oh yeah, they probably yeah. But I was thinking like they have like Seattle engine, cars, Portland engine, cars. Like all in one
Oh
big
yeah, no,
thing,
no,
and
no,
then
no, no. It's
yeah,
yeah, they uncouple, and then
yeah,
that part of the train gets connected to a new engine.
engine.
And
It
now,
was
granted,
it
I
was
was
so
in
awesome if
my
it just split.
I was in my seat. I wasn't actually out there watching what they did, but
Yeah, no,
that's what I
right.
believe happened. And
Yeah.
that's the one and only long distance Amtrak trip I've taken, but I would do it again and again and again. It was just really a great way to go. And you're right, there are times where you could get delayed, and freight trains do
Yeah.
have right of way because essentially Amtrak and local rail, like Metra in the Chicago area,
Right.
and I don't remember what it's called in Los Angeles, but they essentially
Yeah.
lease the lines from the freight
From the freight.
companies. So
Yeah.
that's part of the deal is
Yeah.
they get right away. And yeah, we did get past several times, but a lot of it is, it's so hard to believe, but it's so well scheduled that, they know where they need to be and stop
Yeah.
to let that freight train go by. And yeah.
And keep on going. I thought you were going to say, when you said you were in your seat, I thought you were going to say I was drunk in the dining car
No,
for most of the trip. So
no, I was
I
not.
didn't,
I didn't, I
no.
didn't once go to the bar car. I should have. I did not.
Yeah.
And I didn't go to the, what do they call it? The view liner with the glass roof.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I didn't
I
go
always,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I was one car away from the dining car. The food was great. The food was fantastic, and it was included with the ticket.
Oh,
So
that's nice.
you got the food, you got a place to sleep,
Really
and
nice.
you didn't have to worry about anything. You got a
Yeah.
great view as you're passing through the mountains and all that. It was really
I
really a
just,
fantastic trip and very cost
I love
effective.
trains.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very cost effective.
My cousin who lives in Wisconsin, he used to, when he worked for this law firm that was in Minneapolis, and he lived in outside of Madison, he would get on the train at Columbus and take it to Minneapolis, not every day, but like, whenever he had to go up there. And I think rent a car. And he said, I don't know if it was 3 hours by train or whatever, but he said, it was great. He could work on his stuff while he was riding to get there, and then, be able to jump off. And yeah, he loved it. And
Yeah.
I think that sounds really good.
Yeah, I had a friend who commuted from Chicago to Quad Cities by Amtrak every day. Every day, commuted
Yeah.
from Quad Cities to Amtrak. And then,
Isn't that
yeah, you're
something?
right. To go from Chicago to Milwaukee and then up into Minneapolis, it's actually a pretty quick trip. It doesn't take
It
long at
is.
all.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, now we're going to get going. Here we go.
Here we go.
Here we go. All right. That 15 minutes should have been more than enough time for me to take my notes.
Yeah.
All right, here,
What else can I do? I've given you all this time. Yeah.
here we go. 3, 2, 1. It's For Mac Eyes Only, episode number 408 for April 28th, 2023. Pick a Mac, any Mac. Hey everyone, welcome back to For Mac Eyes Only, the show for the Mac community, where we share our thoughts and opinions on current Mac news and events. And joining me to talk Macs today is my For Mac Eyes Only co-host, Eric Erickson. Hey Eric, how you doing?
Hey, Mike. Pretty good. How are you?
I
You know,
am doing great. I'm doing great. And for those of you joining us live, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat room too. So if you have any questions or comments as we move along, be sure to preface it with a Q or the word question, and we'll try to address it. So, Eric, I had a very interesting phone call last week. Um, it- I called a national company for support, a billing support issue, and by the end of the phone call, which ended up being around 35 minutes long, not only had I shifted the conversation away from the reason I called, but in speaking with this wonderful support rep, who actually took care of my problem, by the way, Jessica, actually took care of my problem, but we shifted the conversation to Macs. She, it turned out she owns an iPhone, and I think she said she also owns an iPad, but she has never owned a Mac. And yet, her friends had been telling her for quite some time how much she would love a Mac because of how well it integrates with her phone, how well it would integrate with the iPad. Plus, she told me that she had seen firsthand how cool it is to take a phone call on the Mac or respond to messages on the Mac, things like that. And so I just naturally shifted the conversation over to, well, here's what you need to think about when you're buying a Mac. And this, 5-10 minute call that it should have only been 5 or 10 minutes turned out to be like 35 minutes because I completely changed the conversation over and started giving her all this advice on what she should look for in a Mac. And of course, I mentioned for Mac Eyes Only. I mentioned Dave's show, In Touch with iOS, because she was an iPhone user. I mentioned Allison's show. I mentioned Chuck's show, Mac Voices. I mean, I was loading her up with all this information so that she could do a little research on what would make a great Mac. Because I figured, a 35-minute conversation isn't going to be enough for that.
Yeah. Yep.
But I imagine that you have these conversations as well. That, when you talk to friends, you talk to family, you talk to clients, you no doubt have conversations about what would make a great Mac for them, don't you?
Yeah. Yep. Or just even, just as opposed to a Windows PC, why a Mac might be better or, work for them or, and even sometimes too, where they may have an aging Mac and they think, maybe I'll just switch to Windows or I'll just get a PC. I use that at work or I'm used to that or whatever. And I'll kind of talk to them and say, look, the Mac you've got is 10 years old, running this, the newer ones, you can do this and that. So yeah, it does come up. And of course too, just either through basic questions like that, or just through helping somebody else with their computer, either in both cases.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually glad you mentioned that because I thought today would be a great day. This episode would be a great time to talk about considerations for first-time Mac buyers, or, as you pointed out, folks who've maybe been holding on to an older Mac for a long time, because we do tend to do that. I mean, I've mentioned several times in the show that I only just traded in my 2012 Mac here at home for a newer Mac Studio. So I had that thing 10 years.
Yeah.
And it replaced a computer that I had for 10 years before that. So, we tend to hang on to Macs for a long time. And they allow us to. Apple continues to support Macs for many, many years beyond the years that you might get reliable support for a Windows PC.
Right.
Linux is a different story, but as far as Windows PCs are concerned, they tend to bog down pretty badly over time, even though they can technically run Windows 10 or they could technically run Windows 11. They tend to bog down as you throw more and more at them. And yet the Mac, even if it doesn't get the latest features, you can still take advantage of, the latest install of Monterey or even Ventura in some cases.
Yeah.
On a Mac that's only 5-6 years old. And I say only because I've had them much longer than that.
Yeah, exactly. No, me as well. In fact, I had bought a 2012 MacBook Pro that was, I think, was in kind of the initial one where they had the Retina display. It was a 15-inch, and they took out it was like one of the first ones without an optical drive. And besides the MacBook Air. And it was a terrific Mac. And in fact, really, I even liked it better than the 2016 redesign. But I had that for a number of years until recently. And then my daughter used it. I gave it to her when I had gotten a newer one. This is probably 6 years back now. But she used it for quite a while. And I think the latest OS, Mac OS that it ran probably was, I would say a couple after Yosemite. It wasn't, it didn't get into, maybe it did Mojave. I'm trying to think, but it was kind of amazing how far it went into it. And then it ran, and then she got a new computer and I think I helped her with that, or a new hand-me-down. And then I said, or she had said, there's this person I work with, he's going into this with engineering, whatever. He needs a computer. Could he use mine? And my old one. And I said, yeah. And then that was where I decided, I ran the
Open Core. Didn't you do Open Core
Open
with it?
Core.
Yeah,
Yep,
Open Core
I
Legacy
did.
Patcher. Yeah.
Legacy pad. Yeah, exactly. And I put on Big Sur, and I should have just went and put on the latest, but I thought, well, I just took a chance, and I thought, but then that ended up working so well. I thought, wow, I should have just, done the latest, not Ventura. Ventura wasn't out at the time, but you know, I could have done past that, and it worked. And as far as I know, he's been using it. Everything is going well, and he's still using it to this day.
Yeah, and we had a whole conversation on Open Core Legacy Patcher, and that's not really the intent
Yeah,
of today's conversation.
no, but it's a way of making old Macs run the latest version, even if Apple doesn't support it, and it's
Exactly.
reliable.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And you know what? By the time that Apple does not support a Mac any longer, very often we're ready to move on anyway.
yeah, I know.
Quite frankly, I mean,
Yep.
I have mentioned that 2012 iMac at the office, I did apply Open Core Legacy Patcher to it, and I am running Monterey on it. I've not upgraded it to Ventura yet, although it will work. But I've not done it yet. But I have been considering if the limitations of the 2012, for example, the inability to unlock it with my Apple Watch, things like that. If
Right.
the
Yeah.
limitations are enough for me to consider buying something to replace it.
Yeah.
Now, having just replaced my desktop computer here at home, not quite a year ago, I'm not quite ready to do that yet. But I think that will be the next one I replace. And it's not because I can't keep it going with Open Core Legacy Patcher, which I can. And it's not a difficult thing to do that, but it might just be time. It might just be time to move on to something that adds the functionality that I'd be looking for as a modern user.
Right. And when you say the one at home, you're not talking about your studio. You're talking
The
about,
Mac Studio, yeah, is here in my home
oh,
office.
that's the one you're talking to, you would replace?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
At my office, I have a
Oh,
2012 iMac
gotcha.
with
You're
a
right.
Core
Yep.
i5.
Yes. Yeah. It's kind
And
of amazing that
yeah,
that's still doing good
oh, it's
with
still
the
doing
Core
great.
i5 too.
Part of the
Yeah.
reason it's doing great, to be honest, though, is that I was able to do something that you can't do with current Macs, and that was open it up and
Yeah.
replace the traditional mechanical hard drive with an SSD. Now,
With an
granted, that's
SSD.
not something you have to do anymore. All Macs come with
Right.
SSDs these days. But
Right.
that was something I was able to do. And because I was able to do that, and I was able to replace the 1 terabyte traditional hard drive with a 2 terabyte SSD, that gave it more physical life. And then by using Open Core Legacy Patcher, I could give it more, software, software
Right.
life
Right.
by doing that. But it's getting to the point where I think it's probably best to consider moving on.
Right.
But that's something to talk about, because there are other folks out there who've been holding on to an older Mac, like I am at the office. Maybe are finally looking to upgrade, or again, like Jessica, first-time Mac buyers who just don't know what to get. So it's interesting though, because when we were talking about Macs and I was telling her about the different models, one of the very first things she said, and again, it was a long conversation that should have never, how they always say this conversation may be recorded at the
Yeah. I
beginning?
know you're right.
I
Yeah.
remember saying to her, that your bosses are going to go back and listen to this conversation later and
Right.
wonder why you were spending 30 minutes on the phone
30.
talking to somebody about a new Mac for you.
Yeah.
But that said, one
Yeah.
of the things that she mentioned as we were discussing this is that she definitely wanted a portable. Now, I had to give her a little grief about this because her comment on portables was, look, it's not 2005. Who wants a desktop any longer?
Right.
So that immediately made me feel old.
Yeah.
And I immediately teased her and said, well, I'm working on a desktop right now as we speak.
Yeah.
And it might not be a 2005, but they're still very functional and there's still a good reason to get one. So
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you just bought one.
I,
Yeah.
I just bought one. So that's a great question, though. And I thought that's maybe where we should start. If someone is new to the Mac, maybe they have an iPhone, maybe they have an iPad, but they're new to the Mac, or like I said, they have held on to that older Mac for for quite some time and are now ready with the new Apple Silicon Macs out. Maybe they're ready to move on to something new. I thought maybe that's a good place to start. That there are two directions you can go with a new Mac: laptop
Yeah.
and desktop. So,
Yep.
why would someone like Jessica want a laptop versus a desktop?
Yeah. Well, you know what? Are you asking or are you?
I'm
Or
asking.
is it
I'm
second?
asking, Eric, because you
The
tend to buy laptops.
I tend to, yeah, and I haven't bought the desktop now that they have the Mac Studio, which came after I bought my last laptop. I definitely would, if I was trying to get a Mac to really go all out, certainly I would get a Mac Studio. And it's funny when she said it's not 2005 anymore. It's I actually made that decision for portables back in the 90s, and a friend of mine who was in college at UW at the time, he had a PowerBook, and he let me use it for a presentation I was doing, and I said, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome," and so not too long after that, in 1998, I bought a PowerBook G3. And so, anyway, and at that time, I wanted to try to get as much bang for the buck. So, that PowerBook Wall Street version was kind of what they call a quote unquote desktop replacement. I use air quotes because it's not ever really a desktop replacement. But
Right.
if you, well, actually, I was going to say now with Apple Silicon and with what the M1 Max, the M1 Pro, and now the M2 Max and the M2 Pro, what you can do with a higher end laptop like the MacBook Pro is quite amazing. And so you can literally, and I dock mine into a little vertical holder. I have a CalDigit dock on one side and a CalDigit Thunderbolt hub on the other, plug in two cables, and I've got two monitors, keyboard, and everything. And it's like you wouldn't know that I had a laptop behind it. And the way that it functions and the way that it's able to, handle video and all that stuff is pretty amazing. So if you go the route that you're like, I want to take my computer with me, I want to be able to take it to wherever I want to go, and still have some power, the MacBook Pro is a great machine for that. The other thing that a laptop allows you to do versus getting even a desktop and a laptop is I used to always have this motto: sync before you leave, because I would be working on my desktop, do all this work, and I'd think, oh, okay, I'll take my laptop with me, I'll take my MacBook Pro, and I'll continue it on to wherever I go and where I'm going to work. And then I would get there, and I'm like, oh, I didn't sync. I don't have those files, and they're on Dropbox, and for whatever reason, the internet where I'd be wouldn't be as good as it was at home, and so it'd take forever. But just having a laptop and it's simply plugging it and unplugging it, you have everything all there, already there. Now, the reason why you may not want to go that route is obviously the expense. Because when you buy a portable, you are getting a screen. I was going to say whether you need it or not, but you do need it because it's portable. And you also you don't have to get one with bigger storage, but unless you want to lug extra things around. I mean, to me, depending on how you use your computer, half a terabyte or a terabyte really isn't quite enough
It's not that
to,
much. Yeah.
yeah, it's not nearly as much as what it used to be. And so, and you could start getting up there pretty quick. I mean, the desktop is the best bang for the buck, and it's always going to be that way. I mean, I think it's just a matter of physics. In a desktop machine, even something as small as a Mini or a Mac Studio, you can fit more guts in there than you can in a super thin half inch or quarter inch, whatever laptop. It's just not. I mean, you can just fix, or you can put in bigger processors, you can put in bigger fans, you can do all sorts of stuff. And so, if you need the power or the capability for whatever reason, you're always better off going with a desktop over a laptop. But today's laptops, especially the MacBook Pros, are a great compromise.
Yeah, and you've touched on a couple points that I was thinking of myself. The number one reason to get a laptop, and you mentioned it right at the get-go, is that portability. If you absolutely need to take it with you wherever you go, or you just like to work in different rooms of the house,
Right.
then that's pretty much your only choice. The interesting thing that you mentioned, and I was kind of wavering on this as I thought about it, is the functionality, or the capacity of it. Because in the Intel days of Macs, and I won't go any further back than that, but in the Intel days of Macs, which technically are still around,
Yeah.
Apple,
Yep.
Apple,
Yeah.
technically still around, but in the Intel days, you would find a slightly different variation, a low power variation of a processor in the laptops in order to
Right.
facilitate better cooling.
Right.
You would also find, much larger, bigger fans in the laptops that tend to kick in far more frequently than they
Yes.
do, if ever, with an Apple Silicon Mac. However, now that Apple has switched over to their own processors, the what you're getting in a MacBook Air versus a MacBook Pro versus a Mac Mini versus a Mac Studio is virtually identical
Yeah.
these days.
It's a lot closer than, yeah.
The biggest difference really is how, as you said, how hard you can push it, and what Apple can do internally to keep things cool as you're doing that. There's a reason there are two big honking fans on a Mac Studio
Right.
versus no fans on a MacBook Air.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Little bit of difference there, and
Yeah.
that comes into that cost versus the desktop that you mentioned as well. You are paying for the screen, no doubt, but a big chunk of what you're paying for really is the engineering to cram everything
Yeah.
into that ultra slim MacBook Air or MacBook Pro. That's really what you're paying
Exactly.
for when you buy a laptop, whether you're buying a
Yep.
laptop, a PC laptop, because that same logic holds true for PCs.
Oh yeah.
Not that we're trying to sell anybody on a Dell XPS or anything, but
Right.
if you buy an XPS versus a precision workstation, you're paying for the engineering to cram the higher powered processors and memory and storage into that XPS versus a precision workstation.
Yep.
There's just
Yep.
no way to get around that. And that's why
Nope.
it's often a better bang for your buck if you don't need the portability to get a desktop. And
Right.
I think to a certain, that's always held true for Apples, but I think that still is a consideration when it comes to buying a laptop versus a desktop Mac. That
Yeah.
there is a little bit more bang for the buck, not necessarily in the processor, not necessarily in the storage, and not necessarily in the memory, because we have that unified architecture now, but it is in things like expansion. You get at 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 minimum two USB-C Thunderbolt ports on a MacBook Air.
Right. Right.
Maybe you get four. I think, well, so now you get what? HDMI, headphone jack, a
SD card.
few, yeah, SD card.
Yep.
So you get, as you bump up in laptop, you're getting this stuff. But then again, to engineer the MacBook Pro in such a way that they can add that into it, you're paying for that
Right.
versus a Mac Mini
Right.
that has it right there. In fact, you even have an Ethernet jack on a Mac
Right.
Mini.
Exactly. Exactly.
So you get more bang for your buck, even if it's an iMac, where
Right.
they've gone to the extent where they've engineered all thickness out of the iMac. I don't think there's any way to make it any thinner than they have.
I don't think so
But then
either.
again, we
I
said
really
that
don't.
about the remodel a few years ago, right? When they with the tapered
Right.
edge, we're like, how can they make it any
Right.
thinner? Well, they did.
Yeah, they
So who
did.
knows?
Yeah.
Maybe someday they will. But they've engineered the thickness out of that thing so that if you do need or want Ethernet, they moved it to the power adapter.
Right.
But
Right.
again, you get that
Right.
gorgeous
Yeah, that's
24-inch display. You get more expansion ports on the back. You get the
yeah.
Ethernet jack if you get the model that has it built into the power adapter. You do tend to get a little bit more, even if the processor and the memory and the storage are equal.
Yeah. Right. And yeah, that's exactly right. You do get and again, kind of like I said with mine, because of the port inavailability, however you want to say it. I mean, I had to spend extra money on an external dock and a Thunderbolt
Hmm.
hub to
Right.
get everything, essentially the same as I would have had on a desktop. If I had gotten an iMac or, a Mac Studio, I wouldn't have had to do that necessarily unless I was really going nuts. But yeah, right.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I wanted to mention too. Is if you want that larger screen, if you want a bigger keyboard, a different keyboard, if you want to use a mouse
Right.
with it, or maybe Apple's trackpad, that all comes at extra expense.
Yep.
When you buy an iMac, now we'll set aside the Mac Mini for just a second, but when you buy an iMac, you get all that with it.
Right.
So you get the big, beautiful screen, you get the keyboard, you get the mouse, you get all that in the box. In fact, Apple even color codes it to the Mac that you pick these days.
That's
So
right. Yeah. Which
there,
is sweet.
there's, when you look at, well, what is the Magic Mouse these days? I think it's like $89 or $99, something like that.
Yeah.
And then
Anyway.
the
Yep.
keyboard is like 140, something along those lines,
Trackpad
130, 140 for the
is
small one,
yep.
more for
Trackpad's
the
at
Touch
least that.
ID. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's expensive to add on those things. Now, if you were to get a Mac Mini, there's a little bit of cost advantage because you if you're moving from a PC, you can use the existing display that you have. You can technically use your existing keyboard. You can use your existing mouse. I don't generally recommend a PC keyboard on a Mac, but you can do it. It will work. You get used to a couple key differentiations, but you can do it. But I think the one expense you'd want to make there is to get an Apple specific keyboard, whether it's from Macally or Apple or Logitech or whomever. But short of that, you can move to a Mac Mini and be in
Yeah.
pretty good shape without spending a lot of money or breaking the bank. Now, one thing, oh, well, I'll mention that when Eric gets back. Eric had to step out for just a moment, so we'll resume our conversation with him in just a minute. But as far as desktops are concerned, if you don't need to move it around and you have a desk that you typically work at, I think almost certainly the answer is get a desktop. As we already said, you get more expansion. You get the bigger screen on the iMac. The iMac includes that keyboard and mouse. And if you opt not to get an iMac, you can use your existing keyboard, mouse, your existing display. You don't have to buy an Apple keyboard and mouse. And if you do buy something that's Apple specific, there are plenty of third-party manufacturers that will happily sell you an Apple specific keyboard and mouse, as I just mentioned a moment ago. We're going to take a short break here as Eric goes and answers the door, because there's one point I want to bring up about laptops that I'd like to get his thoughts on before we move on to the next portion of our conversation. We'll just take a brief break here. This is much better than the breaks we'll take in other weeks where we just outright dropped Eric and he had to rejoin us, having to go answer the door. Hey, we can deal with that. How's Dave doing out there? Oh, this is, by the way, one of those points where you can use the chapter markers down here in the corner of the show when you're watching the re-air of this and just jump right back to the resumption of the conversation. That's why we put the chapter markers in there. That's why we do it. You know, the last episode, I mentioned this on Mac Voices the other night when I was on there, but I was waiting an extraordinarily long time at the car dealer for some work to be done on our family vehicle. And thinking of you guys, I used that time to add chapter markers to the last episode of For Mac Guys Only. It's interesting because it takes a long time. I want to make sure I put markers. I don't like to use the automated ones that YouTube puts in there. So I like to put markers in there where there's actually an interesting point in the conversation or an interesting change in the conversation so that you can jump straight to that point. Or maybe sometimes it's not so interesting. Maybe it's just humorous. But I like to put chapter markers in there so that you can skip ahead if you want to and know where you are skipping to. So it's interesting because in these longer conversations that we have, you know, the show itself, when it's edited down, is maybe an hour and a half, something like that. But these live recording sessions will be upwards of two. I mean, we're at an hour and 15 right now. They'll be upwards of, you know, two plus hours. And so you might want to jump ahead. You might want to go straight to the recording time. You might want to say, what is this coffee talk they were talking about at the beginning, and jump to that and listen to our conversation about coffee or what have you. But it takes a long time to go through and do that because I'm essentially re-listening to the episode again. Like I can kind of remember where we made changes, and when we get to the core conversation, the core of the show, it's fairly easy to tell because I can see where the conversation has switched to Eric or me, and I can say, okay, well, that's where we started talking about laptop versus desktop, or that's where we started talking about our next topic, which is, you know, the differences in the various M series processors, you know, things like that. But yeah, it takes a little while to add them, and sometimes things take precedence over adding chapter markers in. So the re-air of the live show doesn't make it out until much later than the actual edited down version of the show, which of course is much quicker because I just go through and I lop off that first, you know, we started at 46 minutes, lop off that first 46 minutes, lop off the whole end of the time that Eric and I are online recording, lop all that off, and then that's left with just the core of the show. So I'm only editing that. I do essentially listen to the whole thing again and clean things up as best I can, like this whole section here while Eric is out answering, getting a delivery at the door. This will obviously all be edited out. But it's easy to edit out because I can see in the waveforms where I started just rambling on and on and on while he's off doing this. And then I can see where he picks up again. And I know, okay, that whole section I can take out. I don't have to listen to it. But when we're adding chapter markers, that's an interesting beast in and of itself. I guess I should consider letting YouTube/Google automatically add them, but I prefer to add them myself and put my own commentary in there. Although they do a pretty good job. I've seen automated chapter markers on some other vlogs, and YouTube does a good job of it. I honestly don't know how it works. It's got to go back to that AI that we were talking about before recording. Let's take a look at this chair Eric has. It's labeled Secret Lab. Secret Lab Titan. I have no idea what that means. Fancy chairs. I have a traditional office chair. I'm not that fancy. I just need something that, Oswald can look over my shoulder from. But I will be updating this shelf here pretty soon. I've got some new stuff to put on that shelf. And then this shelf over here too. I got to clean that up and put some other things over there. Can't see my... Man, it's hard to do this backwards. Can't see my Batman shelf very well. That's all mostly Batmobiles on the top shelf, various Batmobiles. And then I have a Batman figure right there. A couple other small figures and stuff in there. Well, how long does it take to answer the door, Eric? The world may never know. The joys of live recording. Oh, I see. That's why Dave didn't respond to me. I don't think he's watching anymore. He dropped. That's all right. Here comes Eric. He's muted.
Sorry about that.
Oh, there you go. Unmuted.
I unmuted. Sorry, it was our electric company telling me that they were going to trim trees around our house, and I needed to let them into the backyard, and then he proceeded to tell me what trees and I'm like, I don't really care. I
don't care. Just trim them.
Do it.
If you don't trim them, bad things will happen, right? So do what you must.
Right.
Don't leave me
you must. Yeah.
Don't leave me a stump in the backyard, but do what you must.
Do what you must. Yeah. The last Santa Ana windstorm that we had, there was a bigger one. You could see wires laying across, or the tree was bent into the wire, and said, "Oh, that's not good," but it didn't do anything. But it's generally, luckily, they're fairly strong. But I don't know why they don't bury more stuff.
We're all underground here. All underground.
It seems like that's the way to go, but they, at least with the case of Southern California Edison, they seem to like to keep it up in the air. And I know Anaheim moved. There used to be where we used to live, there used to be huge power lines running over. It's all been since buried. And it seemed like too, like every 7 months a car would hit one and the power would go out. And so they probably got sick of that too. So, but
yeah, we do have the major towers, those are all above ground.
Yeah. Sure.
And yeah, we do have cars hit them, and we have relay stations blow out and, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so back to the topic. I wanted to save this last bit for you to get back in your seat to talk about it, because it does directly affect you. So one thing I wanted to mention, at least it's a consideration when deciding to go with laptop versus desktop, and especially if you're going to do what you do, Eric, and that is use your laptop as a desktop when it's not otherwise a portable machine, you have to be careful with one thing, and that's not leaving it plugged in all the time. Leaving it plugged in all the
Yes.
time is
Yep.
only going to ruin the battery, and that's just an expensive repair you don't need down the road if you're essentially using a
Right.
laptop as a desktop. If you purchase a laptop for some romantic notion of being able to carry it around with you all the time and then you never do, then it probably was not a good purchase. Something like a Mac Mini would be
Right.
a much better purchase for you. If you are going to carry it around, if you are going to dock it, and I don't know how well this would actually work for you, but we do this at home with my wife's MacBook Air, is I've told my wife, just don't leave it plugged in all the time. Let it run down to 20, 25%, plug it in, charge it up, and then unplug
Yep.
it again. Just,
Yep.
run off battery as much as possible so that you're keeping that battery. I don't necessarily like to use this term, but you're keeping that battery exercised. You're keeping that battery
Yeah.
active. You're not overcharging it, even though there's technology in Mac OS and in the Mac itself to prevent overcharging. It still happens. I've had at least 3 MacBook Pro batteries fail on me because I tended to keep them plugged in all the time. And those are
Yep.
Macs that allegedly had overcharging protection in them. So, it's something that you do need to be careful with. It's actually true for any device that has a lithium-ion battery, whether it's your iPhone
Yeah.
or whether it's everything uses a lithium-ion battery these days. Don't leave it plugged in
Yes.
and charging all the time. Get it charged up,
Right.
take it off the charger, let it run down, and charge it back up again. If that's inconvenient to you because you're primarily using the laptop as a desktop, buy a desktop. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Now, as
Right.
someone who uses a laptop as a desktop, how do you handle that?
Kind of well, not very well. Especially with this one. When I initially got it, yeah, the Mac Studio didn't exist, and this was like I think for a bit there, this was actually the fastest Mac that Apple made outside of the Mac Pro. But even there, I don't know. The M1 Max, at least in its initial form, was only in the MacBook Pro and the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and I think it was kind of like the way that I saw it was, well, this is going to be faster than my current one, and I'm also going to be able to take it anywhere I want to, and the portability for me is still a big deal. But so I ended up having it plugged in constantly, and a big part of that, and the problem with that is that you cannot have it unplugged when you're essentially using it as in a desktop mode. When you have the I think what Apple used to call it the clamshell when it's closed, and you want to use a keyboard, an external keyboard and mouse with it, you need to have it plugged in. That's the only way that it'll work. If you plug in
That's
external
true.
monitor and keyboard and mouse, it needs to be plugged into power. That's actually kind of, I think, partially how it knows. Okay, you're using me as this now. If I would unplug the power from it right now, it probably would just, I don't know, it probably would shut off, or probably wouldn't necessarily shut off, but it would probably revert back to the inside the computer, and I
Yeah.
wouldn't have access to the monitor. So that is the one bummer with that. But I would say I would tell it, and I should have did this from the get go, but I now unplug it and I take it elsewhere with me, or sometimes I just unplug it from the desktop anyway and let it sit there. again, the other issue with that is I have external drives plugged into it. So you always have to make sure that you eject those safely. And for all, no matter what, I always run into this where I can't eject one or the other.
I
It seems
know.
like it takes a good 30 seconds to eject. And then there's something using one of my drives. And so I kind of go through this and the force eject and everything. And I've even tried to write a script kind of for that and with varying degrees of luck. But so it's not always easy to disconnect the power. And even if you want to, but I've tried doing that, and I told my wife too with her phone because she's one to kind of charge it up. It gets down to 70%, and she's like, "I got to charge this thing up. This is
Hmm.
And I told her sometime back. I said, just you can if you're going to top it off at 80%. Don't
Right.
charge it higher than 80%, and don't let it fall below 20. I said if you can keep it within there during the day when you're using it, that'll be good. And really, Apple does take care of a lot of that. Ray Ritchie has a video on batteries and Lion batteries and Apple's devices, and he kind of went into detail about that. And he said there's people that jump through all these hoops and do all these things. He goes, but really the crux of it is Apple does that for you. You really don't have to do all this. He goes, unless you want to. However, with the laptop thing, that does make a notable difference if you're using it as a desktop and that's your principal thing. Like you said, had the Mac Studio been around at the time, I might have gotten a Mac Studio instead of this. But now, of course, yeah. So I'm going to look at my battery and see. So according to iStat menus, my cycles are 83. I think the battery has a build date, a manufacturer date of September 4th, 2021. Cycles are 83, so really relatively low cycles. The health is 86%, which according to iStat menu is fair. So its design capacity was 88,694 milliamps per hour. Right now it's at 7471, so 86% of what it originally was designed. So within less than 2 years, I've lost quite a bit of the battery capability just because I've kept it plugged in. Coconut battery actually even has a better thing because it can show you a graph against other people's batteries for the same laptop in the same time period, and it kind of showed. So I do probably need to get this in here into Apple. However, I do have the battery optimization turned on, and one of the things it's done repeatedly over and over again is if I have it off the charger and I put it back on, a lot of times it'll just charge up to 80% and just stay there. In fact, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times it does that. It'll just sit at 80%. Initially, when it did that, I was looking at it through iStat menus and it said like charging paused, or no, it just said not charging. And I thought, what the heck is going on? Is something? And then when I actually looked at the Apple battery inside the system preferences, it said charging paused or charging on hold or whatever. And so I'm like, okay. So it does do that. I don't know how much that actually helps, but it is what it is. And like you said, if you're going to get a laptop and you're going to be principally using it, well, not let's say if you're going to be using it as a desktop more than half the time, I would say seriously consider getting a desktop or be prepared to be sinking money into batteries earlier than you want to, well before you're sick of the computer, well before the computer reaches its 5-year date or whatever
Yeah.
time where you think maybe I want to get a new one. And unfortunately, that is the case. And I have not had trouble with other laptops like this or phones or whatever, anything that I've run on the battery. Like you said, charge it up, then unplug it. And now I unplug it from the charger, and even if I have my iPad plugged into it to charge it and use it as an external display, I still leave it unplugged until I get down to 20-30%, just so I can use it.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned optimized battery charging because I completely neglected to bring that up, and you're right. That is incredible technology that Apple has put into recent model phones, laptops, and other devices, iPads and even watches,
AirPods,
to prevent
AirPods
what
too. Yeah.
to prevent what I mentioned, and that is
Yep.
the swelling of batteries when they're overcharged or charged for too long. And I've seen that same thing, the not charging, and wondered, what the heck? Why isn't it? I need a charge. But, I tend or want to do that with my phone. I have, I use the induction charging. I don't plug it into US or to Lightning unless I have to.
Right.
But I tend to use the induction charging and MagSafe charging, and just get it up to 100 and then take it off. And I think because of the weirdness of when I put it on the charger and take it off the charger, and there's no consistency to it with me. Optimized battery charging doesn't typically kick in on the phone. And I think it's a
But
little weird with my MacBook too.
yeah, well, yeah, especially with my MacBook on the phone because I generally do it at night for the most. And it's same thing with Tracy to a point. It will actually wait. It'll like slowly charge through the night and do like the final bit just before you get up. It actually is set up that way. And I think, my wife gets up at like 20 to 5. And I think her phone even said, phone will finish charging at 4 a.m. And so, like 40 minutes before she gets up. And again, this Renee Ritchie video covers all that too. But there's a whole bunch of algorithms in there and whatnot, just to help. But I guess the big thing for batteries, the things that kill lithium-ion batteries the quickest and is the worst on them is heat
Heat.
and fast
Yep.
charging.
Yeah.
Fast charging, which causes heat, and I have So and like you said, I can never figure out too with how it's charging, especially with my phone and my watch. Sometimes it'll discharge almost really fast, and I'll be down to like 20 or 30%, and I'll put it on the charger, and it'll be like 100% within 40 minutes.
I know.
And other times I'll put it on there at 60%, and like 3 hours later, I'm like, it's at 93%. I'm like, what is going on? Why? So I'm sure it's going through its little things, but it is kind of maddening sometimes. So
And I will second your suggestion of Coconut Battery. Coconut Battery is a great app for checking on the status of your battery, what its original
Yep.
capacity was, what its current capacity is, and things like the manufacturer date of the battery and stuff like that. Now, this 2018 MacBook Pro that I'm using right at the moment was purchased as a refurb from Apple, which I do want to talk about in just a little bit. But when I pull up Coconut Battery, it shows that the manufacture date of the battery was March 11th, 2019. So even though it's a 2018 MacBook Pro at the time I purchased it, and that's what Apple tends to do when you buy a refurbished MacBook from them anyways, they put a new battery in it.
Yep.
But this battery design capacity is 5,088 milliamp hours, and I'm currently at 87.5% of that. So it's when you get down to 80% that Apple will swap it. I believe it's 80%. And I think if you're above 80%, then they don't generally recommend a battery swap.
Swap. Okay, I see. I see. But the thing is though, Chris, I don't know, maybe it's slowed down a little bit, but that mine, like I said, was at 86%. It seems like, man, it's going to be down below 80% in no time. If it keeps going like it's been going, yeah.
That's one thing about lithium-ion batteries is when they start to fail, they fail hard. And a real good sign that your battery is on its way out, at least in my experience, is you'll watch your battery meter get down to like 60, 55%, and then your computer just cuts off.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's you're like, okay, well, I need that new battery. Interestingly, the
Yep.
MacBook, that MacBook I bought, the really small, the 12-inch one, that battery failed pretty hard pretty quickly. And I didn't do anything different in terms of charging it or not charging it than I do with this MacBook Pro. But it's a much smaller battery. The capacity was
Yeah.
never quite what this MacBook Pro's battery was, and it failed much sooner than it did on here.
Isn't it? It just could be just a bad battery or just some sort of thing that it's, that, it's either defective or somehow it got a little hot once and it took. I
Yep.
I was just looking at coconut battery in the history, and it looks like since I've been probably I should have done it from the beginning, but it looks like as of August 11th, 2022, it had 36 cycles on it. Its health was 88.6 at 7,704 milliamps per hour. Now today, as of 4/28/23, it has 83 cycles on it, so over double, and it's just dipped down to 85.9. So it's dipped, essentially 2.5% about in the last half a year. So it's not been quite a year, but and that could be because again I've made the habit of trying to take it off and you know take it off the charger. Maybe that's helped a little bit. So
And mine,
you never
conversely,
know.
and then we'll move on to the next topic, but mine's at 289 cycles.
Okay, so you're pushing the faded 300.
Yeah, I
And
guess so.
and what is your
But
battery
again,
at?
my capacity is currently at 87.5%, so I'm rated as good.
See, yeah, and that's where I'm thinking I should be, because I mean I have less than 100 cycles, and I'm less than you. I'm
However,
less
however, you don't let your battery drain as frequently as I do and then charge it
ex-
up.
exactly. That's
Yep.
exactly right.
And I think
Yep.
that's part of it. So it really comes down to your daily habits and your needs. But the
Yep.
point of all that is if it's a computer that you're going to primarily be leaving in and docked or just, in use at a desk all the time,
Right.
I would strongly consider a desktop, whether it be a Mac Mini or an
Yeah.
iMac. Consider that desktop. It doesn't take, when you think about a desktop PC, don't. Because the amount of space that a
Yeah.
Mac Mini or an iMac especially takes on your desk is minimal, minimal at best.
Even Mac Studio.
Even Mac Studio, where the Mac Studio and the Mac
Yeah.
Mini come into play, and where they start to take more desk space is if you're using a third-party display or a third-party keyboard and mouse. They tend to be a little bit bulkier and take up more space than, say, an iMac does, where it's all in one. So
Right.
maybe even
Right.
lean towards that iMac. If you're looking at a desktop and you need to get a display and you need to get a keyboard, you need to get a mouse, look at that iMac because ultimately I
Yeah.
think it's going to be a more cost-effective proposition for you. The only thing that makes that a very difficult recommendation right at the moment is we're still on that 2021 M1 iMac, and I feel like any day we're going to hear about an M2 or maybe this fall an M3 iMac, and it's hard when we're potentially months, if not just weeks away from a new model being announced to say, go get that M1. Even though the M1's a great machine, it's nice and fast, there are limitations to it, which I want to talk about right now. How's that for a lead in, Eric?
Excellent.
Because there are considerations when you look at buying a new Mac these days. And one of the first considerations, whether you realize it or not, is what processor, what version, what variant of the M series processor are you going to get?
Yeah.
If you're looking at the iMac, Right now, you have one choice. That's it. And it's the M1.
Yeah, well,
There is no M1 Pro, there's no M1 Max. You can get the M1. And that's it. And that's actually a little sad state of affairs for the iMac, if I'm being honest. They really need to get it to at least the M2 or the M3. I don't care. Just get it to the next generation, because I feel as if Apple
I'm
is
surprised they
hindering.
haven't.
I'm surprised they haven't too. I think they're hindering current sales of the iMac because it's not there yet. And
Yeah.
the reason is what I want to talk about. Without getting into all the nitty gritty specs, what does an M2 Pro or an M2 Max, or for that matter, an M1 Pro or an M1 Max, what does that give you that an M1 or an M2 doesn't? And I'm asking you.
Are you? Yeah, yeah. Well, the big thing is, and you take like the M1 and versus the M2. The M2 out of the box actually comes with stuff that it's able to handle. First of all, it's able to handle more memory right from the get go. So the M1 can handle up to 16 gigabyte of memory. The M2 can handles up to 24 gigabytes of memory. And so
And
when
starts
you
at
get into
16.
the M,
It
right,
starts at
right,
16,
right,
doesn't
as
it?
opposed to
Yeah.
eight.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so when you get up to the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, uh, those things, they add the capability to handle more memory. So in the case of the M1, up to 64 gigabyte, and I think in the case of M2 is 96 or maybe even 128.
In
So
the Max,
a
yeah.
lot more memory. Yeah, and also more power in the GPU section. Plus, they also have extra capabilities within the chip itself. So the M1 Max, for example, if you do a lot of video encoding, or if you you do a lot of video editing and whatnot, and you need to render it into transcode it into a different, you've created this movie, this awesome movie in Final Cut Pro, and now you want to save it as whatever codec that YouTube will like, or any other movie sharing or video sharing site that you want to put it on. That How that works is obviously it can be either the CPU or the GPU that does it, but in the case of the M1 Max, it has special video encoding hardware, or I don't know, the lack of a better term for it, inside of it that'll actually make that faster. Now, it's limited, I think, to certain kinds of video encoding, and the same thing with the M2. And I think actually the M2 has that almost built into its basic chip, as whereas with the M1 you had to get that, you would only get that if you had an M1 Pro or an M1 Max. And so the M2 starts at a higher level than the M1 right from the get-go, and then when you add the
Hmm.
Max and the Pro, Max, and Ultra, you actually get even more. And so because it's what's kind of funny is, we're used to saying Intel this or AMD that, and especially in the case of the typical chips, and we're saying, okay, we got the Core i7, and it's has 3.1 gigahertz and it has turbo boost or whatever, and there you're talking about just the processor itself and maybe certain level one and level two caches. But really, when you talk about the M1 and the M2 and the Pros, the Max, the Ultra, you're talking the whole computer, really. I mean, you're talking about the whole motherboard, and you're talking about the graphics. So you've got several things as a part of it. And a typical computer, they would be separate: the memory, or the RAM memory, the microprocessor itself, and the video cards, the video graphics card. All that stuff is together in in the case of the M1 and the M2, and in fact they call it a system on the chip, So it's one big die with a whole bunch of stuff on it. So it's almost like saying the difference between an M1 Max and an M1 Pro and then the original M1 is the motherboard. I mean, is the actual stuff that it has on it, and not just the actual basic processor, but the extra stuff, the unified memory and the graphics capability, the GPU.
And Apple, we're talking about M1 versus M2. Apple has pretty much moved on from the M1 processor or system on a chip, as you rightly said. They've moved on to the M2 for the Mac Mini. The Mac Studio still uses the M1 series, although it's the M1 Max and the M1 Ultra.
Ultra. Right.
The Mac Mini now offers the M2 and the M2 Pro. The MacBook Air and the iMac are kind of the holdouts here. The iMac is only the M1 series, and there is no M1 Pro, no M1 Max, so you're, as you said, limited to 16 gig of memory. And, when you compare it to the M2, relatively as powerful. Look, I don't mean to malign the iMac because it's a nice, fast computer. I mean, we know how we felt when we saw the benchmarks of those M1 iMacs when they came out. It's a fast computer. Someone who's moving from a much older Mac to an M1 iMac is not going to be disappointed. Don't get me wrong. You're going to love that machine. And for day-to-day usage, 8 gig or 16 gig is more than enough. When you compare it to the M2, however, actually the number of cores in it is identical, really. You have 8 cores, you have 4 performance cores, you have 4 efficiency cores. Where it does differ is the GPU cores, the number of processing cores dedicated to graphics. And it also differs in the number of transistors and the number of or the amount of memory you can have in it. That's really where the M2 and the M1 differ, is in that regard. There's other things like the amount of memory bandwidth and stuff like that that's different between the two. In fact, the memory bandwidth on an M2 is not quite. It's what, maybe 30 to 40% higher than it is. I translate that to how quickly it can transfer information to and from the memory of the computer as you're working on it. I think it's 100 gigabytes per second versus something like 60 or 65 gigabytes per second, somewhere in that range. And then it goes up from there as you go into the Pro and the Max. But as far as the M1 versus the M2, the big difference in if you were to get an M2 iMac, the big difference is the amount of memory you can get in it. And your stock iMac would come with 16 gig on an M2 versus 8 gig on an M1.
Yep.
So you shouldn't really discount the iMac. It's a beautiful computer. It's a fast computer. My big hesitancy in recommending it is that when is the M2 version of it going to come out? When is the M3 version of it going to come out? Is Apple going to announce the M3, put it into, say, the Mac Studio, and then bump the iMac to the M2? I mean, what is their plan? We don't know. We have no idea what their plan is.
Yeah.
But I feel as if any day we're going to hear about a new iMac. And it's
you almost think you have to.
You feel like you have to, and the price is going to be the same. That's the thing. It's not like they're going to come out with the M2 iMac and say, well, this is now $300-400 more. It's going to be very similar in price to that M1 iMac. And maybe not exact, but very similar in price to it.
Very similar. Yep.
That's my only hesitancy. But if you need a computer right now, I don't think you'll go wrong with the M1 iMac. It certainly would foot the bill and then some, and then some, then some, then some over any older iMac. And
for sure.
It certainly would run circles around a PC that you might be moving from. So that's a
Right.
great
And
choice.
he, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And
I like you, I have no idea why they haven't switched to the M2. It just doesn't make sense to me.
especially in what I would call a flagship computer. I consider the iMac to be kind of that flagship desktop computer for Apple. Maybe they're shifting it. Maybe the Mac Mini is where they want to put their focus these days. But I really,
Or the Mac Studio.
when someone thinks, when someone who doesn't know Apple products thinks about a Mac, what do they picture? They either picture that, that bubble iMac from 1997, or they picture, the
Well,
flat screen iMac that's sitting on a desk. That's what you see in television shows when there's Macs in a show. It's an iMac sitting on a desk. Interestingly, some very old
right.
iMacs in some cases. It's interesting to see these, big, thicker, non-tapered edge iMacs in some shows. And you're like, well, they can't possibly be using that for anything useful. And yet there it is in a modern television
There
show
it
on
is.
Apple TV Plus. There's this old Mac in there.
Right.
And
I
then it
know.
says at the end, partially sponsored by Apple. Well, why aren't you putting a new iMac in there, Apple?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Right. The thing that I was going to say, the classic iMac, or even the original Mac, and that's kind of, I mean, the Mac has always kind of been that all in one right from the get go. I mean, that was
hmm
Jobs's kind of dream. That was his first design. It was an all
yeah,
in one computer, an
yeah,
appliance. And when he came back, that was the iMac was that new vision of that. And you can see how it's changed over time. And I think, yeah, I am like you. I kind of think of it as the flagship, sort of the benchmark. Maybe the Mac Pro is technically technically termed, the flagship of the fleet, but it's the iMac is that steady stalwart. That's the one that to me, like you said, when you think of a Mac, a desktop, you think of an iMac.
right.
And I don't know if they're waiting for, if they're, I know there's people that still think that the 27-inch iMac is coming, and maybe I'm wrong about that. I had thought that, the studio was that, but it certainly doesn't make a lot of sense in the standpoint of why they haven't put an M2. There's no engineering reason that I can think
I
of
can't
why
think of
they
one.
wouldn't have
Yeah,
stuck an M2 in there.
it
No,
sure would make it
it's just,
for the price point. It sure would make it a much, much, much more attractive computer than many competing brands. When you
yeah,
when you look at a Dell Optiplex or something like that, and you're looking at a nice, powerful, minimum 16 gigabyte iMac with an M2 processor, it's almost a no brainer. I mean, look,
yeah,
it's to us it's a no brainer to get an M1, but people see that 8 gig and 256 gig of storage, and they're like, well, it's kind of underpowered for the price point.
poultry.
Yeah,
Yeah, even even if it isn't, it looks, and you wonder. You would think too that Apple, especially making their own processors and on their own schedule, not beholden to Intel, would put the most powerful thing they can into whatever Mac that they're building. If it's a 24-inch iMac, it'd be an M2, just a basic M2, or an M2 Pro possibly.
that would be fine.
That it at least an M2, not something that is, it was new 2 years ago or
Two
year and a
years.
half ago.
Yeah.
I just think that they would be sticking in so that it always looks like a more viable purchase than a PC. Just like, well, look at, you get this 24-inch iMac, you get an M2, that's, equivalent to blah 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 in Intel world or whatever. It's much faster, da, da, da. And it just, I mean, that actual the whole ARM chips or whatever you want to call them, reduced instructions. That's kind of what the iMac was made for. I mean, that's really what has been the Achilles heel in a way of the iMac or the Mac Mini. In fact, the Mac Mini has always kind of been typically the guts of a portable stuck in a little
hmm
desktop box.
hmm
And the iMac wasn't too far behind there just because of the lack of space and everything else. it was, a lot of times they had almost not a lot of times in the most extreme version, the 27-inch iMac with the highest end, you would get a desktop class processor. But a lot of times you'd have a video card that was more reserved for laptops and even the memory to a certain point. And it's now with Apple Silicon, it's not that way. I mean, you can get a desktop class chip, and in fact, I don't think there's probably any reason why they couldn't stick an M2 Max in a 24-inch iMac
Not without the right,
skids.
if they put the right cooling in it, for sure they could.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And you got to think that they would have that capability.
And I say this next thing with a dollop of humor, so keep that in mind as I say this, but even the creaky, old looking 13-inch MacBook Pro comes with an M2 chip these days.
Yes, right, right.
So it's really, really odd that the iMac hasn't yet. And like you said, there shouldn't be any major engineering hurdles to putting an M2 in an iMac. And if Apple is complaining at all about sales of Macs being down, that may be part of the reason. I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know. I'm just, throwing that out there, but let's modernize, it sounds so weird to say because it's only 2 years old, but let's modernize the iMac and put
right,
an M2 in it, for goodness sakes.
right,
Come on, Apple.
right.
Now, let's talk about where you find an M1 versus an M2. Every single Mac, the MacBook Pro, the Mac Mini, we won't talk about the Mac Pro, and the MacBook Air are all available with the M2 processor. There are two that are still available with the M1 series processor, and that would be the previous model MacBook Air and the Mac Studio. And the Mac Studio is almost starting to look. I saw someone say this the other day, and I went, oh, yeah, that could be. It's almost like it's a one off type machine. Like it was some sort of stopgap that Apple created just to appease people who wanted something more than a Mac Mini, but didn't want that Intel Mac Pro and, needed the power or wanted the power of the M1 Max or M1 Ultra, but again, without spending $50,000 on a Mac Pro. And it
Right.
seems like it fills that niche and perhaps only fills that niche long enough for the Apple Silicon Mac Pro to come along. I don't know if I fully
Yeah.
agree with that, but the fact that they haven't upgraded the Mac Studio to an M2 kind of lends a little credence to that.
Yeah. Although what's got that different over even the iMac is that, like you said, I think that was made its debut last summer, so that's not even a year old. It would be a little bit early, I think, and for Apple to update it. Not that they couldn't, but and maybe they've got something else in mind too that they want to do. But if they would have updated that to the M2, within a month of the M2 making its debut, you probably, well, maybe
I
not
wouldn't
you,
have been
but I
happy.
think people would have probably, yeah, I think people would have been like, what the heck? And so I think if they, updated at WWDC or, later on in the summer, August or whatever, I think that'll be fine. And I,
Yeah.
I think most people will be. The other thing is too, and I know that it's been noted, and I haven't really looked at the numbers completely, but I know in the case of the MacBook Pro, the 16-inch MacBook Pro, that the M2 Pro and the M2 Max are definitely worth it getting over the M1 Pro and
Hmm.
Max. That there is a good jump, and I assume the same thing would be for the Studio and the Ultra, but maybe not. Maybe they would. It's maybe not quite enough to not that they wouldn't do it, but it might be the sort of situation where it's not a huge jump because the Ultra pushes the M1 to the max and and doing an M2 Ultra, maybe I don't know, maybe their own internal benchmarking or whatever show that it's not that much better. Maybe they're ready for the M3. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a
It's
good
just
point too.
you
That's a
never
good
know.
point too. It really will be interesting to see what they do with the Mac Pro, if anything.
Yeah,
I also saw a
I know.
supposition that maybe they'll just continue as an Intel Mac, because there are several industries that would kind of prefer that. Yeah, that they want that
Yeah,
extendability. The software that they run kind of requires it, so why not keep it as an Intel?
and and I've also seen this supposition. I think it was MacWorld that said, "Does Apple even need a Mac Pro
I'm not
at
sure they
this
do.
point?" And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know either. But I definitely think it makes sense to leave it Intel for a while yet, especially, and for a couple of reasons, like you said, the industries that might need it could require an Intel processor, and also just the to get away from the system on a chip and make it more upgradable
Yeah.
in post, with after purchase. And I think those are two excellent reasons to keep Intel in there, at least an Intel version of it. So
So,
go from there.
just to kind of wrap up here, so you'll find the M1 chip in the MacBook, the previous model MacBook Air, which is still sold as new. You'll find it in the iMac, and you'll find it in the Mac Studio. As far as the MacBook Pro, and as far as the MacBook
Mac
Air,
Mini.
the new MacBook
Yep.
Air, that's where you're going to find the M2 chips. Quite frankly, as you mentioned a moment ago, Eric, my Mac Studio's an M1 Max. It was the entry level version of it. I didn't max it out or anything. It's the entry level version. The only thing I upgraded on it was storage, which I'd like to talk about in just a second. And we have an M1 MacBook Air in the house, and it's a fantastic computer. So, like I said, I don't mean to, malign the M1 series. They're great, great computers. But if that $200 difference in price between the M2 MacBook Air and the M1 MacBook Air fits within your budget, you may strongly want to consider that M2 just for the added
M2.
capabilities that it brings you.
Yep. Yep.
So let's talk about some of the other things. So, what are some of the other things that people need to consider other than the processor? And I think probably the one thing that comes to mind is what we've already talked about, and that's memory. When you're looking at these M1 series Macs and they come with 8 gig of memory, is that enough, or should they be upgrading to 16 gig? Should they be looking at an M2 that comes with more? I feel as if, at least with the MacBook Air that we purchased here, that for most day-to-day users, 8 gig with Apple Silicon, plenty. Plenty. You don't need more than that. If you're not a typical user, if you're going to do some video editing from time to time, if you're going to do some photo editing, like serious photo editing from time to time, not just managing pictures and photos, but I mean, opening up
Right.
Affinity Photo, working with large images, working with Photoshop, working with large desktop publishing layouts in InDesign or Affinity Publisher, doing video editing, and even iMovie or Final Cut Pro or what have you, Blackmagic's project, whatever, or product,
Adobe Premiere. Yeah. Dissolve.
Adobe Premiere, you
Resolve.
want as much memory as you can throw at the computer. But otherwise, I think 8 gig is plenty for people. And that's because of this system on a chip that you described that not only integrates the memory and the processor, but the storage as well. And so, if you're looking at a last previous generation MacBook Air, I'd say for that model computer, 8 gig is probably plenty. If you're looking at a current generation, I think starting with the 16 gig, the base 16 gig is plenty. You don't necessarily need to bump to 32. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know. And we've talked about this in the past too. That it used to, the what was the old saying? You can never have too much money or RAM.
Mm-hmm.
And I think not that that still doesn't apply, especially the money part. But it's it's not the way that it used to be, at least on the surface that that I can see. In fact, even how they gauge memory and memory usage is different now, and I think there's been not just differences in the hardware, Apple Silicon, but also in Mac OS comparison to the way that it was a number of years ago, 5, 10 years ago, comparison to what it is now. There, there is the Apple Silicon part of it, and there also is the storage part of it as well. Things switched over to SSD some time ago, even before Apple Silicon, but now with Apple Silicon, so you've kind of got this, I want to say perfect storm, but you've got this culmination of things that you know make it so that probably the amount of memory that you would need isn't, unless you've got some extreme requirements, isn't as necessary as what it used to be. And one of the things is, and it probably kind of gets down to why memory is needed and what is RAM. And RAM is really, when you think about it, it's like your brain. If you're thinking about things and you're trying to remember something, or you're trying to do some sort of calculation or whatever, your brain needs to have the ability to remember what you're doing and
It's
as
a
you're
scratch
doing it.
pad.
And so,
Yeah.
right. And so that's what memory is. It's a place, it's a buffer, it's a place that the processor uses to put stuff and hold it while it's carrying out some sort of operation. And so the faster the memory is, in the case of unified memory, and the faster your storage is, it you can probably get by with less memory than you otherwise would, because if things are flowing through faster, if things are being either written out to SSD, if some of these operations that would normally be stored in RAM are quickly written out to the storage SSD, or they're processed quickly because of the processor's faster and the unified memory is writing right on the same chip next to it, so things get done quicker. Well, that frees up memory to be used for something else. And so kind of what you run into is you really just need more memory to hold bigger files within what you're doing. So if you're doing some sort of special effects for video or video editing on some sort of thing where it needs to load a huge chunk of that into main memory, that's a reason to get more memory. If you're running a bunch of things at one time, and maybe you're running a spreadsheet and you're doing some calculation or whatever, you're using a web browser and email and word processor, you get all those things up, before, where that might have eaten up your 8 gigabytes pretty quickly. Now with memory compression in Mac OS and the speed of things with Apple Silicon, I don't want to say smoke and mirrors, but there's a lot of things that can get done at one time with less memory than what there used to be. In fact, like I said earlier, even how they measure that is a little bit different. You used to look at memory usage and you'd say, well, okay, so 70% of my memory is being used up, and so I've only got 30% left. And you think, oh, wow, I'm running out. But now if you go into Activity Monitor, which is Apple's gauges for your system, or you use something like iStat menus, and you look at the memory usage, it measures the down pressure. So you can have 70% of the memory being used up, but only 15% pressure, 20% pressure, something that's fairly low, which means that even though things are being occupied, it's actually not being heavily used. And so, which seems like it's a better gauge. So again, not that more memory isn't a good thing. And I always say, if you can afford it, do it. The more processor, the more memory, the better hardware you buy today, the longer it's going to last you down the line. But it's not this critical component that it used to be. That, when you think about it, 8 gig of memory has been around for a long time. I mean, you could go back to 2012 and get a 16 gig MacBook Pro, and even earlier. And so the way memory had been, RAM memory especially, had been going up and up and up, it's kind of not stalled out, but I mean, it's not like every basic computer now has 32 gigabytes of RAM or 24 gig of RAM. You know,
Right.
a lot of it's 8 or 16, and and people are managing just fine with that
On the Mac. On the Mac. On
on the Mac.
Windows,
Yeah,
on Windows, I think you really need to consider 16. And on Intel Macs, I
yeah,
think you need to consider 16. But on Apple Silicon, the one thing you alluded to is yes, with memory compression, and the way that Apple manages memory these days, it's less critical, but that swapping still takes place. When memory is full
yep,
and the Mac needs some place to put things, it swaps it out to your
yep,
storage. And with this integrated system on a chip and the storage and the memory and the processor all being one, like you said, yeah, it's not smoke and mirrors, but it happens so quickly that
yep.
the where we used to physically hear our drive swapping,
Swapping.
you could tell when that swapping was taking place because you'd hear that in the background as it's trying to write out and read, write and read to the hard drive. That happens so quickly now that 8 gig for most users, if you're buying an entry level MacBook Air or iMac, is going to be fantastic. It's going to be fine. If
Yeah,
16 is in your budget and you're buying an M1 Mac, get 16. It's like $200 difference. But
right,
and if you're buying an
right,
M2, you're going to
exactly.
start at 16. And I really don't think you need more than that. It's on
Right.
that low end with the 8 or 16 where it's kind of a question. Should we get it? Should we not get it? I made the decision to make the investment in storage with the MacBook Air and bump the storage
Yeah.
from 256 to 512 because yes, Apple still ships Macs with a paltry 256 gig of storage, and I think that
It's,
that's just
yeah,
way too little, and quite frankly, a bit of an embarrassment when someone is
it is.
literally comparing PCs to Macs.
To
You know,
max. I
you're
know.
looking at
That is really stupid.
minimum 512 gig of storage on a PC these days. It's hard to find one with less unless it's a, budget build 256 gig SSD or in some cases 128 gig SSD just to meet a particular price point
Right.
with a PC. But you're going to see PCs that start at 512 or even a terabyte of storage these days. And then you look at the
Yeah.
Mac and it's got 256. So I really think they need to bump that minimum to 512. But that is an area
Apple
where
needs to
I
get with it.
think making the investment in storage is a much better decision when you're buying a Mac of any sort than it is to necessarily bump to that next level of memory.
Right. And I think probably a good gauge of that is if you're asking myself, do I need this extra memory? You probably don't. You probably, if the first time you heard about it was from us or researching into this, you probably don't. I mean,
Yeah.
most people that need that, they know what they're going to use it for. They know what they're doing. It's, I mow people's lawns or I mow park lawns for a living. I need to get the 80-inch cut mower. I can't get by with less or whatever. It's the sort of thing where I'm going to use this. I know I will. And you do run into people. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to do. And you get it and you're like, oh my gosh, I outgrew this really fast because I'm doing this now. But
Yeah.
you can cross that bridge when you get there. And yeah, I think if you're not ever concerned about it or you kind of have a question about it, like, is it something I would use? Then no, I wouldn't worry about it. And
Yeah.
if you're not using software that's going to demand it, then I wouldn't even, I would just do the 8,
Yeah.
like you said, or
And I
do the bottom amount.
and as far as storage is concerned, if you're buying a laptop to use as your primary computer, I feel pretty good saying bump to 512. Don't even mess with the
Yeah.
256 because you're going to run out of that sooner than
Right.
later. Think about your iPhone. Think about trying to get by with a budget iPhone with 32 gig of storage or, what have you, 128 gig of storage. And then you realize pretty quickly how fast you can outgrow that. And folks who buy 256 gig of storage tend to outgrow it unless everything that they ever do is in the cloud, unless they don't want a local copy of their photos, which I think is, I personally think
Right.
that's a little dangerous.
Yep.
And unless they just absolutely never store anything on their Mac. If it's simply to interact with the world via the internet, via, everything that you do is in the cloud, 256 is plenty. If you keep anything of any note, if you're going to do any video editing, if you're going to keep photos on your computer, if you're going to keep, heck, even documents these days, if you're going to keep documents on your computer, 256 starts to look pretty small pretty quickly. And I think
Yeah.
512 is a good investment. But that's one of those things where it's less it's less of a, gosh, should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? Than it is I know I'm going to use this space. I know what my previous computer had. Most people know. I know how much storage
Yeah.
my computer had. I know how full that storage is. And if you have 512 now and you're pushing it, well, then you might even want to bump to a terabyte. Or
Yep.
strongly consider doing things differently than you're doing things right now. And if it's a desktop computer, well, I guess you could get by with 256 because you can always add on an external drive that you can then move your large photo library to, or you can move your music library to. Music, that's another one too. Music,
Hmm.
TV shows, movies, all this kind of stuff. If you like to keep that on your laptop, if you're traveling with your laptop and you like to have movies and music and stuff with you all the time, you're not necessarily going to have internet, seriously consider that bump up in storage as well. But photos is always the big thing.
Yeah.
Photos is where people eat up their storage and don't realize that it's happening until it's happened, and then they wonder where did everything go. And almost certainly you can point to photos more often than not.
Yeah. And your storage is almost the exact opposite of memory because to me, and we've talked about this before too. And I don't know why I even said this, but when I had got my MacBook Pro Max, or the M1 Max, I got 4 terabytes of memory, and I said I'm not sure why I got that big, and you said, "Well, I do because it's a portable. I mean, otherwise you're gonna have to lug around external drives. If it's just something that sits on the desk all day, a desktop, you can plug external drives into it, which I do, but you also want to be able to keep that with you. And so I think when you're buying, especially a portable Mac, that you get the biggest storage that you can for
Yeah,
it, so that you don't run, because it's not like RAM. RAM things are in and out. It shuts off. Everything is gone.
right.
Storage things build up over time. So that is
Right.
your
Yes, they
file
do.
drawer or whatever you want to call it. And so unless you're somebody that I just delete stuff and I move it off here and I whatever, you're going to run out of storage pretty quickly. Like
Yeah.
you said, even if you just document. Yeah.
I have a question here. I tried to write various questions, what someone would ask. And the next question I'm going to hold, I'll tell you what it is. The question is, why not Intel? But I want to hold on to that for just a minute. Instead, what I want to talk about real quick is refurbished versus new. That I feel that Apple's refurbished program is a fantastic way to pick up a new Mac. And I
Yep.
guess new is a bit of a misnomer there because typically what you'll find in Apple's refurbished store are Macs that someone purchased, had a little bit of buyer's remorse. Maybe they bought it with 256 gig of storage, got it home, restored their time machine back up to it, and said, "Oh, I don't have enough space. I need to get a different model." And so they use that generous 14-day return period. They get it back to Apple. Apple gets them one with a terabyte of storage instead, and they're happy as clams. But now Apple can't sell that computer as new. So what do? They refurbish it. If it's a laptop, they put a new battery in it. If it's a desktop, they make sure it's in good shape, that there's little damage to it. At worst, I think there was maybe a tiny little nick in the aluminum edge of a MacBook Pro I purchased refurbished once from Apple. But that almost never happens. You never see that sort of thing.
Yeah.
In fact,
Right.
they even went so far. I remember this, and even though they don't sell these anymore, But remember when they sold the different color iPods? I
Yeah. Oh,
read
yeah.
that when Apple refurbishes those, not only did they put a new battery in it, but they put a new external colored sleeve on it as well and recycled the old one just to make sure that a refurbished iPod didn't have any scratches and nicks and stuff on it. They put a
Oh,
new external sleeve on it.
nice.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Is that not true? I don't know, but I remember the source I was reading is a pretty credible source, and I believe it. I believe it because when
Yeah.
you buy a
Yeah.
refurbished Mac from Apple, that thing comes wrapped in the plastic that it would have come wrapped in if you bought it new. It comes
Right.
with a brand new power supply. It comes with brand new manuals. It comes with the little Apple stickers. It comes with the same,
Yep.
here's the critical thing, it comes with the exact same warranty that you would get if you purchased new from Apple. The only thing that you don't get new is the box. You get a little box that says Apple refurbished on it. It's a plain white box. But other than that, it is effectively a new computer. And the fact that it comes with that same 1-year warranty, and oh, by the way, you qualify for Apple Care as well, refurbished is a
Yeah.
great way to go.
It's an
Now,
excellent way to go. In fact, I have a MacBook Pro Intel version refurb bought a number of years back, and still being used to this day.
yep.
Wonderful Mac.
And it's not the easiest to find the refurbished store on Apple's site. The way you find it is you scroll all the way to the bottom of any of their pages on their site. And in the little tiny menus at the bottom of their site, you're going to see under Apple Store, you're going to see certified refurbished. And that's what you want to click on.
Right.
Now, the when you're shopping for a new Mac, new-ish Mac, I'll say, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But if you're shopping for that new Mac, you need a new Mac, and you go into certified refurbished, one of the first things you're going to do is tell them what type of refurbished product you're looking for, a Mac, an iPhone, iPad, what have you. You go into Mac. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. If you are looking for something very specific, if you're looking for that purple iMac with 16 gig of memory and 1 terabyte of storage and, all these wonderful custom things that you would like it to have, they have to have that in their refurbished store in order for you to
Right.
get it. You can't custom build a
Yeah.
refurbished Mac. These are Macs that have
No.
been built or, have been returned and are now being made available at a discount to you by way of Apple's refurbished store. So as much as there are great benefits to buying refurbished, the big downfall is that they have to have what you want. If they don't have it, or they don't have anything close to it, like maybe, you want that midnight blue MacBook Air, but all they have is space gray. Well,
Right.
you have to
Right.
make a decision.
Yep.
Do you love the midnight blue enough to pay the extra $200 to get it? Or are you good with space gray? And that's really what
Space
it
gray.
comes down
Right.
to.
Exactly.
You can also just wait. The interesting thing, what I've noticed, and again, this is just kind of hearsay and casual observation, but when a new model Mac comes out, it's amazing how many refurbished versions of the previous model are now in the refurbished store. I really feel that sometimes what you're buying is brand new, that it was never
Yeah.
sold.
Because they
That-
just right.
And they used
Yeah,
to
that makes
call
sense.
it certified or refurbished and clearanced. And now they just call it certified refurbished. So I'm not quite sure what's changed there, or if they change that wording when they do have computers for clearance. But you're getting what is effectively a new computer at a pretty decent discount. Usually $160 to $250, something like that. But again, they have to
Yeah.
have it.
Easily.
So
Right.
if someone is looking at buying their first Mac, or they're looking at replacing a Mac that they've had for a long time, my advice is always start in Apple's certified refurbished store. Go to apple.com, scroll to the bottom, go to certified refurbished and shop and see what you can find. And if they find it, buy it, because that inventory changes constantly. There's a constant churn of inventory on their site. to the point where if you don't find what you're looking for and you have a little time, check back. Check back tomorrow. Check back next week because they may end up having it. So
Right. Right.
always check certified refurbished. And if they don't have it, you could always buy new. But there are other options. I know you buy refurbished, I buy refurbished, I buy new when it warrants it. But there's another option too, and that's buying used, which I've done, and I know you've done. But should someone buy used, Eric?
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you can find a good used Mac, I've actually sold. I was going to say more than one, several on eBay myself. When I've upgraded to a newer Mac, I've oftentimes sold it on eBay rather than go the trade-in route or whatever through Apple, and have had good luck. And you know what? There are great deals to be had out there, either off a major selling site like eBay or even elsewhere that sell used Macs. It's a great way to get a modern or more modern Mac and letting somebody else take the depreciation hit on it and get use out of it. Now, obviously, it can kind of come with all sorts of you know, I guess I was going to say there's caveats to it, and when you look at the used market, you're kind of talking about all over the gamut. It's not like the refurbish from
Right,
Apple where
right.
you're going to get a certain thing, but there are a number of actually, I was going to say there are a number of companies that sell on eBay that sell a like new Macs too that are pretty much almost refurbished, and you could save a little money that way. But also, a lot of times I'll do is I'll look for single sellers, somebody that oftentimes is in the company, and look at their rating and look at what they show and make sure that I can see the pictures they've got,
Mm-hmm.
you know, good pictures of it that kind of show the quality of it. And, I've bought iMacs off of eBay or Macs off of eBay used as well and have had really good luck. In fact, I bought a 2006 iMac, I think in 2008, and for my daughter, and she used it until probably maybe 5 years ago. I mean, maybe it was a little bit longer than that, but she loved it. It worked for her, but I mean, there's a number of situations like that where you can find a really good used Mac for sale, and you can save a bundle.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
absolutely.
sure.
And my thoughts on that are, if you're going to buy used, one thing to know is you will either get no warranty, or depending on the
Right.
seller, you will get some sort of warranty, 30 days, 90 days, something like that. Very often, if it's a trusted seller, they will offer to sell you an extended warranty that they stand behind. And there are lots and lots of trusted third-party sellers of used Apple hardware out there. But two that I have personal experience with are OWC, Other World Computing,
Yeah.
MacSales.com.
Yep.
Within the last year, they purchased a company called Sell Your Mac. So they are now getting a ton of used Macs in trade, and they are refurbishing them and they're selling them at MacSales.com. And they're not a sponsor, by the way. I just have used them myself. They're
Yeah.
selling them at MacSales.com as in various grades, as you said. They grade them for you. They tell you if it's in good condition, very good condition, excellent condition, near mint, what have you. And their pricing is fantastic. And if it's a computer that can be upgraded, if it's a little bit older model that has the ability to swap the SSD on it or to put more memory in it or what have you, or processors even, they will give you those options. So you can very often go in and say, hey, I'd like to get 2019. Maybe it's not actually swapping the processors. I shouldn't say that. But maybe I'd like to get a 2019 iMac. And when you go through the process of buying one through them, and I've done this myself, if there's a Core i7 available or there's a Core i9 available, or a Core
Mm-hmm.
i5 and you pick it, the models that they have in stock and what matches what you picked for the processor will change so that you can see, oh, okay, well, if I pick a Core i7, I'm going to have these choices for storage or memory. If I pick a Core i5, I'm going to have these choices for storage or memory. And I'll have these choices for what grade, what quality of used equipment it is. But they are a company that stand behind it with a small warranty. It's not, no great shakes, but I think you get 30 days, 30 to 90 days, something like that out of it. And they will sell you an extended warranty that they then stand behind. And the other company I've purchased from is called Mac of All Trades. And they're a good company too. And I've purchased a couple. I purchased an iMac and I purchased actually my 2012 Mac Pro I purchased from them. And they also will grade the computers and tell you what quality it is, what shape it's in, basically. And then they'll give you options to upgrade it on the fly. And they'll give you a short warranty or offer to sell you an extended warranty. So both of those are great companies to work with. And that leads into, and I think we'll wrap up things here. That leads into that question I had a few minutes ago. When would you want an Intel Mac? And I have a couple thoughts on that. My thoughts are, well, it depends on your use, obviously. But if there's a reason that you need to run x86 virtualization, for example, which we had a whole show on a
Right.
few episodes back,
Right.
maybe there's games that you want to run that won't work on Apple Silicon Macs. Or you just need or want to run an older version of Mac OS. Those are three good reasons I can think of that you might want an Intel Mac. What, there are Intel Macs that will run Ventura. So, what other reasons might someone want to buy a used Intel Mac versus a new Mac Mini or an iMac with an M2 or M1, I should say?
Yeah. Well, obviously, the first thing would be price. And, if you can
Yeah.
get a good value for an Intel Mac and get it the price that you want, especially right now, not that obviously there aren't differences and that there won't, but it's not as big right now as what it will be down the line. And if you want to get into Macs slowly and you're looking for a good used Mac that you don't want to spend a ton of money on, Intel version might be exactly what the doctor ordered. And of course, like you said, you can use it for certain things. One of them being, especially if you want to run Windows, let's say through a virtualization software, or even more to the point, Boot Camp. If you want
Mm.
to do that, because I know Boot Camp isn't something that's available on the Apple Silicon. Now, Parallels has made great strides, and I do use Windows 11 on my Mac virtualized through Microsoft's ARM thing, and it works great. And there's very little that I can't run or do, and it's terrific, just like the previous versions were. However, there if you really need certain things, and you want to make sure that you're as compatible as possible with Windows, or even probably be able to run some wine type apps, then Intel will probably be the better way to go. And
Hmm.
just like you said before, and I know it was the Mac Pro and Professional, but you might have certain software that hasn't been updated to the M1 yet. Even in video editing, it's taken a while for Final Cut Pro plugins and motion plugins and some of these other ones, After Effects, to jump over to Apple Silicon. I think they're all, most of the big ones are there now, but it took, the better part of a year or two for that to happen. So, yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing would be price. The second thing would be compatibility with, some older software or special, specific special software that you might have, a niche software that you might need to run.
Hmm.
But beyond that, it's like you said, it's probably more than anything would be price. And the further away we get from today, assuming, like I said, 5 years down the road, it should still be you should still be able to work. Obviously, you probably won't be able to run the latest and greatest OS and software at that point, and you'll have to look at something, but it may very well get you where you want to go today.
Yeah. Yeah. A good example is something that you referenced just a minute ago. If I wanted to run, well, obviously I could fire up my old Mac Pro and do this, but if I wanted to run the old Adobe Creative Suite, now I've since moved on to the Affinity apps, Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer, Affinity Publisher. I've moved on to Pixelmator Pro. I don't really have a need for the Adobe apps for new projects moving forward. But if I come across an old project that doesn't get converted over with the converter that I have for old InDesign projects, and I need to get it into Affinity Publisher, or I just need to work on it and do something and get it done, I need a Mac that can run the Adobe Creative Suite. So that can either be my old Mac Pro, or maybe if I want something with a little bit more power, I could get a used, newer Intel Mac than that 2012, put 10.13 on it, understand that there are some risks inherent in running an older version of Mac OS, take those risks into account. Don't use Safari. Don't use, built-in apps that might have security issues, things like that. Stay off the internet. I wouldn't need the internet, quite frankly. Or just
Right.
surf safely, as they say. There are things that you might need to take into consideration when using older software on older hardware, but you can do it, and there may very well be reasons heck, games. There's a lot of games that I lost when I moved over to this Apple Silicon Mac. I'm like, oh, gosh darn it, I can't run that now?
Yeah.
Oh, man. And there really isn't a good way to do it other than to have that old hardware to run it on. So, yeah, there are some reasons you might want it. Now, would someone who's new to a Mac or, bumping from an older Mac these days want to do that? I don't think so. I think going with Apple Silicon is really the best way to go especially if you're new to the platform. But someone who's been on the platform for a long time has moved on to Apple Silicon and then realizes that they need that older software, and maybe there was something wrong with their older Mac, or it's just a little too old and they could use something newer to run that older software faster. That's a good reason to get a used Mac. And as I said, there's some fantastic trusted sources out there, OWC, Mac of all trades, and tons of others that those are just two I have personal experience with, that you can turn to, pick up that used Mac, or as you said, buy on eBay. Look at the seller's ratings, look for that, buy it now badge, look for what do they call it? Trusted seller badge.
Trusted seller, yep.
Look for those indications that the person you're working with not only has experience on eBay, but has had previous transactions that might give them a little bit more credibility than someone who just decides to sell whatever's in their basement that weekend.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Anything else people should consider if they're switching to the Mac or replacing that old Mac that we didn't cover, Eric?
Not that I can think of offhand. No, I think I was going to say you even covered warranties. So yeah, not not that I can, I'm sure I'll think of something afterwards, but I think we covered it pretty good.
I think we'll both think of something afterwards, and then we can bring that up in a future episode. In fact, for those of you listening, remember, if you like well, I messed that up. How about if I do it this way? I'll just say, well, that's going to do it for this episode of For Mac Guys Only. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Remember, we love to get your letters. So if you have any comments about the show, if you have a tip to share, a software or hardware problem with your Mac, or you have your own tips for someone who's new to the Mac, or maybe wants to upgrade an older Mac, be sure to leave your favorites in the comments of this week's show notes found at formacguysonly.com, or drop me a line, mike@formacguysonly.com. And, of course, be sure to subscribe to the show's YouTube channel at youtube.com/FMEOTV and click that little notification bell so you can find out when we're going live. You can join the chat room, and you can catch all the behind the scenes stuff like the flub I just made that doesn't make it to the final cut of the show. Thanks so much for
Right.
listening, everyone. Thanks to Eric for joining me this episode.
You bet. Of course.
Stay subscribed, and we'll talk to you next time.